All right, and we're live. Welcome everybody. Sorry, we are not having a debate between the Easter Bunny and Jesus. I hate to break it to you. We try. I looked for Jesus in his tomb, and he wasn't there. So tough luck. And the Easter Bunny just he said he had too much going on, too many houses.
So now you're just starting off with a huge black pill. Everybody was expecting us to have had these figures on lockdown well in advance. What are we doing?
You know, I mean, people think like the big gets are Richard Spencer or Sargon of Akkad, but you know, we only go for the top notch here. Yeah, so welcome to the stream, everyone. I'm your host, Matthew Drake, joined as always by Jared Howe.
Yo.
And yeah, we wanted to do a stream just to cover the past couple debates. I felt kind of like we weren't giving enough analysis of the debates, and a lot of times when people do blood sports, they have an hour afterwards, like a post debate session, to really break all the information down and to assess how the debate went. So it's just going to be us right now, although we may have some people joining us. If you really feel like you have something to say, send me a DM on Twitter at Philosophic Art, and maybe we'll bring you on, maybe we won't, but welcome anyway. And so how would you say you've thought the debates have gone, Jared?
Well, the ones that I was present for, I thought were interesting. I think you're going to have to red pill me on the MGTOW debate because I missed that and I didn't get a chance to review before today. So I'm unfortunately not prepared. I'm unprepared. Not very mighty white of me, unfortunately. But yeah, I can imagine how it may have went.
Are you familiar with Global Man at all?
No, I've never heard of either of the people that were participating in that debate. I'm familiar with like the MGTOW ideas or whatever, like men going their own way, or like the whole writing off of women. But no, I was I was not familiar with either of those gentlemen.
Oh, you don't know Mark either, huh?
No.
Okay. Yeah, Mark's a good guy. He's over in the UK, so he's always got lots of sweet insight, and yeah, he said he'd be willing to come back on. Greg Johnson would be willing to come back on. So it's just a matter, it's just these leftists that never want to debate anybody. So
I enjoyed the debate with Greg. He's I don't agree with him on everything. I'm not a National Socialist. It's not because I'm afraid of being called a Nazi, but I'm not a socialist, right? So I don't agree with him.
I don't think he's a socialist, is he?
I think he was. I mean, I don't want to miscategorize the guy. I thought he was saying that he believes in National Socialism, unironically. Like he's into like I may be wrong, but I think he's into like the George Lincoln, Rockwell type of American National Socialism. I'm not really into that sort of stuff, but I think he was really well spoken with regard to race and ethno-nationalism, right? I thought most of his arguments were pretty good. I forget the name of the guy that he was what was Valid Thought, right?
Yeah. It's funny, if you look at the comments on the video, a lot of people thought that Valid Thought was trolling because his arguments were, let's say, subpar. And so
it's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. So they thought, oh, where'd you find this guy? Is he a plant just to make ethno-nationalism look good? Which I don't think he is a plant. I've been to his channel before.
You were being accused of going out of your way of finding somebody who wouldn't put up that much of a fight, or
yeah, exactly.
So would you pay this guy to take a fall?
Which I wish I had thought of that idea. That would be an awesome idea. We should do all of our debates like that.
No, I don't think Greg Johnson. That's his name, right? Greg Johnson. I don't think he needs anybody to pay off his opponents for him. He's usually
Oh, for
pretty good
sure.
at debates.
For sure.
I've heard him over on the first time I ever heard of him actually was over on Warski Live, right? And he was holding his own against 2 or 3 people. So no, I mean, he's pretty good. We could find somebody who's more, I don't know, who's more like adamantly against ethno nationalism and put him up against Greg and see how it goes. I certainly don't want people to think we're softballing it, and I'm sure I mean, we're going to have another chance to debate these topics. Ethno nationalism is something that everybody seems to want to debate lately. It's like the hot button topic.
Yeah, it is a hot button topic. Yeah, I've got some people in mind that would be good. So, audience, if you want to help us out, just go pester some civic nationalists to come on my channel, and we'll have we'll be able to give them a run for their money. That's for sure.
Although today is April Fool's Day, so you might get a lot of people claiming to be civic nationalists who aren't really. I know Daily Stormer is running pieces right now about civic nationalism for their April Fool's special. So
yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like my joke. Okay, I think everybody knew it was a joke. I put hashtag April Fool's Day in the tweet. But you know, for the ones who are really trying to get you, which I could see Anglin and those guys having fun with that. I would be expecting something like that. So, yeah, maybe they actually got some people with it. I don't know.
I bet they did, because they had one article that was like, as Mador announcing a new show with Ricky Vaughn. And I mean, if you're not currently caught up on alt-right drama, a lot of people are mad about Ricky Vaughn even having anything to do with the Daily Stormer. So I think it's kind of funny to see that audience getting trolled. I doubt that he's going to have a regular show over there, but no, I'm sure there's more serious Sidnats in the audience too.
Do you know Hard Mouse? I think he was calling into the Radical Agenda, asking or putting out a call for Ricky Vaughn to debate him, just not openly. So.
I'm sorry, for who to debate him?
This guy Hard Mouse, he wants to debate
Ricky Vaughn.
On optics.
He's like, I'm calling you out. I did hear that call, actually. Yeah, I mean, I'm not even a fan of Ricky Vaughn. I don't know where he came from. Like, he came out of the woodwork, and the most I hear about him is from people who don't like him. So all of his word of mouth advertising comes from, I guess, his enemies. I don't know. He's anti-immigration, which is the biggest thing I care about. If he's anti-immigration, if you're anti-immigration, I generally won't take shots at you. But I guess a lot of people in the alt-right and the ethno-nationalism movement generally don't like him because he counter-signals right a lot, and he counter-signals white nationalists a lot. And I guess I can kind of see where they're coming from, but I don't make it a point to get caught up in all the drama, you know?
I mean, that's something we could go off on, because like, yeah, I look at these channels, and a lot of people are upset with Warski right now because he's trying to put more comedy into his show, and you know, JF wasn't really that keen on it. And
so hold on, were they really fighting right now? I saw like a couple. I didn't watch the videos, but I saw a couple videos come through my feed there where it says Warski versus JF, or like, I don't know. It gave me the impression that they were fighting, but it almost kind of seemed like it was a joke. So maybe you can red pill me on that.
I will red carpet you on that. So the
red box me on it. Yeah.
Red hat.
Yep.
Well, what I know about it is that they were not okay. Basically, Andy sent out some tweets saying that, hey, I think we're gonna try to do slightly different format here, and you know, be more comedic and just kind of have some more chill streams. And then I responded to that tweet with like, hey, if you don't like that they're changing the format, come on our show, because we're not funny or chill. And
well, we have. I mean, it's never chill. We have our moments. when it comes to humor. It's not. It's not.
I like to think so. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, but
Anyway,
JF, he's more of the academic type. He likes to be very serious. He wears the blazer, and so I understand that they were not meshing really well, and just in terms of the schedule. And at some point, JF accused Andy of being lazy and not like pulling his weight and everything, and it kind of felt like uh,
oosh.
JF was trying to like take control of Andy's channel for a bit. But yeah, they had this several hour long debate, or just like, talking it out, bro to bro, I guess. And they sort of worked through it. So they're going to try sort of a middle ground. The main thing they decided on is that they want the show to be good, no matter what style it is. So I guess for the moment, they're still partnering up. They didn't fall out like Alsop and Fuentes did.
I guess I might be kind of biased on what constitutes good, because to be honest with you, man, I'd never even heard of Worski or JF prior to the blood sports thing. It was the I think it was the Kraut and T drama with going after the alt-right that kind of made me aware of these people. And then it was the excuse me, Richard Spencer and Sargon debate that really made me aware of both of these people. So like whatever they were doing before internet blood sports, it never caught my attention. And maybe that doesn't mean anything, but I don't know. I can't bring myself to really sit through like a 3 or 4 hour live stream unless someone is debating something that I'm interested in. So I don't know. I'd like to see the ethno-nationalism debates on their channel. I even like to see people going at each other kind of non-debate style, right? It's shit posting. I think it's entertaining. I like when people have disagreements. I don't know if I would necessarily tune into a chill stream. Although I wouldn't unsubscribe because of chill streams. I'd probably just tune into something else, because whenever I'm listening audio only. And if I don't get the disagreement I'm looking for, I'll just switch the channel. And you know how it is, right? I mean, I'm
the same way. Like I don't get the drama. Okay. Like that, there's all this drama. I don't know if you followed anything with the honey badgers or whatever, and Mr. Medicare. And those things, they get thousands and thousands of views, and it's like I don't have time for that, really. This like pity tit for tat stuff and calling people names, but I don't know. Maybe I'd be more successful if I was.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, being a little bit more like explosive or volatile and unpredictable, I guess it can be entertaining. I don't personally shy away from calling people names, but just carrying out drama is not something that I particularly care for. At the risk, I don't want to get your YouTube channel to show up for saying so, but it seems like something that women would do, right? I don't know, kind of beneath us, I think.
That's right. Yeah, this is mainly men watch my channel, but that's pretty typical in politics. Yeah, I'm glad I don't have any. Don't have.
That's actually a good point. The mostly men watching. That's the question I never got to ask during the debate between Adam Kokesh and Chase Rachels the other day. Is Adam was talking about how we should tailor our messages as libertarians to appeal to everybody and not just white people, And I couldn't help but wonder. It's like I don't even know if Adam knows the answer to the question, but I wonder what % of his audience is actually white male. If his audience is anything like mine or anything like yours, I'd be willing to bet that more than 90% of it is white male. So despite his efforts, I think it's interesting that these ideas and these types of discussions still only appeal to a certain demographic, right? Regardless of whether you're talking about just straight out like inclusive libertarianism, or you're talking about white nationalism, it still ends up being that you've got more than 90% white men in the audience. Do you have any thoughts on that, Matt?
Well, I want to get into that that debate specifically. But some people were asking in the chat, who is this Jared Howe guy? So maybe they're they haven't caught the other streams anyway. But who are you, Jared? By the way,
Who am I? I'm Jared Howe.
introduce yourself, because I'm sure people have heard you before, but maybe they don't remember.
Yeah, you might have seen me in a couple of other places. I used to co-host a podcast called The Downfall with Dave Painter over at an outfit called The Seeds of Liberty. I used to co-host a podcast with a anarcho-capitalist rapper named Eric July over at Backwards Live. It was kind of the same format as this, the like live blood sports thing, except we primarily operated off of Facebook. After that, I co-hosted a podcast with Christopher Cantwell called Live from Seg while he was imprisoned in a Albemarle County jail in Virginia following the Unite the Right rally last August. And now I run my own podcast at jaredhowe.net called So to Speak. You can usually catch it over at The Daily Stormer or ChristopherCantwell.com. Handful of other sites too. So that's who I am in a nutshell, or why you may have heard of me before. But yeah, what were we even talking about before we started talking about me?
You were talking about the Kokesh debate, and
that's
my question.
It's interesting how, like I said, regardless of whether you're talking about just like this very hyper-inclusive style libertarianism, or you're talking about a very exclusive style of white nationalism, that content creators in both of those veins still find that their audiences are more than 90% white and more than 90% male. And it's an interesting phenomenon, right? Because
of course, Adam Kokesh isn't 100% white male, is he?
Oh, I wouldn't even call him white. I mean, I call him Jew. I'm just saying that his audience, like for all the effort he puts into, like, we need to appeal to black people, we need to appeal to mestizos, we need to appeal to all these different types of people. For all the lip service he pays to that, and to all the effort he puts into actually trying to reach non-whites, it wouldn't show. I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority of his audience, like the vast majority of my audience or your audience, Matt, I would be willing to bet that it's almost 100% white and almost 100% male, right? Because that's the demographic of people who care about political ideas regardless of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the whole thing that he kept coming back to is, well, we can do more if we just reach out to everyone. And he wanted to put the burden of proof on us, like, or on Chase, like, Chase, you don't have the data that says that these people aren't going to massively improve. But isn't that burden on him? Like, to come up with data that says, oh, they are going to have this jump in how receptive they are to liberty?
I would say that it is. And Chase, I think, did a really good job at pointing out, other countries and saying, if these people had a predisposition toward libertarianism or libertarian ideas, then why don't we see that reflected in the social structures of any one of their countries? And I think Adam's response to that was something to the effect of, well, you're just using the status quo, where you're looking at reality as it exists now. It's like, okay, that's reality as it exists now. Wouldn't this be prima facie evidence that these people don't have the same I don't know, the same disposition toward libertarianism that white people do? And you say, no, we're talking about their receptiveness to the ideas starting from now. We can't look at anything before now. We can't look at any of the disparate outcomes. We can't look at any of the traditions in any of these countries. We can't look at any of the biological factors that may be influencing these things. It's all. I'm willing to bet that I can talk black people into libertarianism easier than I can talk white people into libertarianism, and then followed by fucking a mountain of anecdotal evidence, which isn't really evidence at all, right?
No, literally his argument is paradigm shift.
I was kind of being an asshole. I put in the chat every time he said it, I was like, paradigm shift. And it happened like 4 times. And it's not an answer. And I don't think that Chase was being unrealistic by saying, okay, well, maybe these people, they have different ways of approaching conflicts. They have different cultures, different traditions, different lifestyles. Maybe the best way to maximize peace between these groups is just to live separately. right? Because being forced to live together, this forced integration, causes conflict. It causes conflict that's antithetical to the libertarianism that Adam says he supports. So if we're going to force people to live together and it causes conflict, what's it all for? At the end of the day, if you value the non-aggression principle and peace and non-violence, if what you're advocating results in more violence and less peace and more racial conflict, why not just live separate? Because you say, oh, well, we're better than that. What do you mean we, Adam? I don't consider myself part, like we might both be libertarians, but I don't consider myself Jewish. I'm not Jewish. I don't consider myself part of your in-group. You certainly don't even live in my state. I live in Maine, which is 95% white. So I'm looking at it like, why do I have to be better than my preferences? What's wrong with me preferring the company of my own people? What's wrong with me wanting to be around only white people? I was raised like that. Everybody in my state lives like that. Like I said, 95% white. Everybody chooses to be here voluntarily. I don't understand why I should have a moral obligation to rise above my own in-group preference. It's like, I think it's a very stereotypical thing to do from the perspective of like an ethnic Jewish person, because they perceive themselves as ethnic outsiders, right? And they come to the host culture and they say, well, why do we have to respect or preserve this host culture, these traditions? Like, why do we have to care about them? We can be better than that. It's like, well, value is subjective, and I prefer these traditions. I prefer this way of life. I don't want to be forced to give that up. I don't want to be forced to accommodate ethnic outsiders. You know what I mean? And like, I feel like libertarians, they all know this shit. They all know that value is subjective, but then when they have something that they can't argue against, they say, well, we can be better than that. Well, better or worse is subjective too, because value is subjective. So what's better for you? Forced inclusion, white people not taking their own side may not necessarily be better for me. My life, the quality of my life is certainly a lot better when white people take their own side and stick up for each other rather than throwing each other under the bus for the sake of virtue signaling to non-whites. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, yeah. And people describe like the Jewish quality of his argument. They describe this as like slippery and like water flowing through your fingers, and it's so true because
a jelly like slime, I think was what. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, but like he'll say, okay, the non-aggression principle. He'll admit, no, I'm okay with allowing people to do it. I'm not going to aggress against you, and then he'll say, and I'm not aggressing against anybody by pushing this. It's just what I'm doing. But the thing is, you have to look at, okay, the culture today, and whites, they are just constantly, yeah, maybe they're not, okay, the government is in some ways oppressing them, but a lot of it is more of a softer oppression, right? It's just, if you speak out, you're going to be fired, right? You just, and this whole paradigm, really, it's the shift has already happened. Like, it's all around us right now. What he's advocating for, like, it's already here, minus the libertarianism. It's just like this multiculturalism that you're constantly swimming in.
Well, that's the thing too, is white people aren't saying we're victims of the government, therefore pay us reparations or some shit like that. They're saying we're victims of democratic public policy, therefore let us be left alone. Let us have our own countries. Let us have our own homeland. Let's not be forced to share a system of government with people who want to use it to take our property. And I think white people, generally speaking, are still able to be successful in spite of all the challenges that government throws at us. But it doesn't mean that we necessarily should have to tolerate being forced to subsidize the importation of people who aren't us, or being forced to subsidize the reproduction, education, healthcare of people who aren't us. Not only that they aren't us, but they didn't contribute to any of these programs, right? And meanwhile, our kids, my kids, I have kids, I'm a father, get sold into transgenerational debt 30, 40, 50 years ahead of time, just so that politicians can bribe these people for votes, import them into our countries, pay them to have kids who will become citizens, and those people eventually grow up and vote. It's the clergy plan. They want to replace white voters because white voters don't vote Democrat more than 50% of the time.
Oh, okay. And the other phrase that he used constantly, besides paradigm shift, is we want to wake people up. And it's like, okay, I understand. Yeah, taxation is theft. That's great. It would be great if people realized that. But, what about waking people up to the the hell of British free speech. You know, where a man who teaches his dog to do a Roman salute and gets jailed. Meanwhile, the police, they just let the rape gangs in Rotherham and Telford have a complete pass. What about waking people up to that? What about waking
not even
people,
just
what
rape
about
gangs, but grooming gangs? They're letting grooming gangs have a pass.
whatever you want to call them. I mean, they're invaders. And then what about waking people up to the land expropriation in South Africa, huh?
Yep.
Why don't we wake people up to that? Why don't we wake people up to the stranglehold that Israel has on both parties in American politics?
It's funny when people say we got to wake people up, and then they propose something that's also being proposed by all of corporate America, all the banks, all the media. We got to wake people up and convince them to support open borders and hyper inclusivity, because you know what? All the corporations and the banks in the world aren't already doing that. The media is not already doing that. The government doesn't have fucking 12, 13 years of curriculum that forces kids to believe that. Like, that's not already happening. And then they say, reject your conditioning, man. Just you gotta let go of that stuff that you learned in public schools, and yet they still put forth this everybody's a unique individual and everybody's special, and you have to treat everybody as an individual, and you can't judge people collectively. It seems very kindergarten-esque to me, but it also seems like it came from the human resources department of a corporate office. Like, I can't tell the difference, but at the same time, it's like, what are you waking people up too? It doesn't seem like you're waking people up. It seems like you're reinforcing the status quo, whether you admit it or not, whether you realize it or not, right?
Yeah, it's pretty aggravating.
I saw that Valid Thought commented in the comments there and said that the non-aggression principle was bullshit. And I'm gonna take the opportunity to disagree with that. I don't think the non-aggression principle is bullshit. I think the non-aggression principle is great. It's a great normative standard for people who are capable of agreeing to it, right? So if I agree to non-aggression and you agree to non-aggression, Matt, then that works out really well because we don't come into conflict with each other. The place where the non-aggression principle fails is when people refuse to abide by it. So when someone says, I don't believe in the non-aggression principle and I'm not going to adhere to it, I say, well, I'm not going to extend to you the protections of the non-aggression principle. If I attack you and you get hurt, don't appeal to don't appeal to self-ownership or non-aggression in your own defense because you already rejected it. And you can say, oh, well, all human history is littered with aggression. Say, okay, and that's why I reject the non-aggression principle. Fine. But then if somebody aggresses against you, damages your body or your property, just don't appeal to the non-aggression principle in your own defense because you already rejected it. You have stopped yourself from appealing to it in your own defense by rejecting it. And
there's this like kind of Jordan Peterson-esque argument that's like, oh, well, if you retaliate in any way, well, you know, you're going to become like them or something, and it's gonna, you know, and it's kind of it's related to the Christian topic, which we could get into because it is Easter, and we had a super chat. Easter bunnies are a way for Jews to make money off Christ. And
where's the lie, though?
Yeah. Now, I mean, I like Christianity. I would consider myself a Christian. And I think that people have infiltrated Christianity, people, and or not even Jews, not even Jews. Yeah. Oh, that we will come back to this, but you do an excellent Jewish voice, by the way. I just wanted to give you that compliment.
I've been working on it for a while. I was really glad when the alt-right was like, yeah, we're doing this anti-Semitism thing, because I have a pretty sweet Jew impression that I've been working on for 15 years. And then I heard Mordecai, and I was like, yeah, there we go. No, but I can't take credit for coming up with the idea. I was definitely inspired by the guys over at TRS on that one, but no, I appreciate the compliment. I've always wanted to sound more Jewish. Not really.
Herschel, oh God.
Oh, oy vey, oh Herschel.
Oh man, I'm totally getting taken down. Anyway,
Got a strike for this one. Whoops. Everybody, we need some super chats for Matt. He's gonna lose his channel over this. Sorry, Goy.
Well, I have, but that's a good lead in to remind people I have a backup channel. So go and subscribe to that. If we get, I think you have to have like 100 subscribers in order to do like live events, and then 1,000 in order to do super chats. So anyway, if we can get up, if we could get up to 1,000, that'd be solid.
Well, yeah, having a backup channel too. It would have come in handy, that other day when we were gonna do. What was it like last week? We were gonna do something, and then you got a strike for no reason, just
on the very day.
Yeah.
Ridiculous,
dude.
And then I had to. That was the MGTOW debate. That's why you weren't able to make it.
Because it happened at 2:00 in the afternoon or whatever. Yep. Yeah, dude. But no, it definitely would be a good idea to have a backup channel. Even my channel is only at like 600 subscribers right now. So even if we wanted to do like super chats and monetize that, we couldn't. So I guess if you're listening to this, maybe go over and subscribe to my channel too, just for backup in case something like that ever happens to Matt's channel again.
It's a good idea. Yeah, everyone subscribe to Jared's channel. So back to the Christianity thing. Now, we were talking before we got on here about the no more DACA deal, and I've just been, perusing Twitter and everything. The liberals they've got their panties in a bunch. How could this is so typical of Trump. He was being so disingenuous before when he was talking about wanting a deal to keep these.
So just to clarify, we're talking about these tweets he just sent out like 5-6 hours ago, right?
Yeah. Do you, I don't have them in front of me. Let me.
I do. I could read a couple. Let's start with he started with Happy Easter. And then he went to Border Patrol agents are not allowed to properly do their job at the border because of ridiculous liberal. And he puts Democrat in parentheses as though people don't know what that means. Laws like catch and release. Getting more dangerous. Caravans coming. Republicans must go nuclear option to pass tough laws. No more DACA deal. And then he followed that up with Mexico is doing very little, if not nothing, at stopping people from flowing into Mexico through their southern border and then into the U.S. He's talking about Guatemalans there. They laugh at our dumb immigration laws. They must stop the big drug and people flows, or I will stop their cash cow. NAFTA. Need wall. So he's throwing down the gauntlet. Oh, apparently. It might just be him blowing smoke up our ass, but it seems like he's throwing down the gauntlet and saying, stop this flow of people now, or we're ending NAFTA. No more DACA deal. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but this reads to me like he's saying there's nothing that they could do to have a DACA deal now. It's not like he's saying stop the flow of people or I'll end a DACA. He's saying no more DACA deal.
Yeah, it sounds like he's saying he's not going to play ball, but he mentioned the nuclear option. So it's dependent on whether, I guess, Congress passes that. Or
that's all on Mitch McConnell too, right? Just to go nuclear, and that's just a simple majority in the Senate to be able to pass any legislation.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't understand why. Well, actually, I do. I was about to say I don't understand why they haven't done this yet, but I do understand why they haven't done this yet, and it's because the Republican Party is controlled by neocons.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. So yeah, people say that the Republicans have a majority, but that's not really true because we all know lots of them are rhinos. And I just love how like the liberals, they are so upset that he would do this on Easter, like, oh, this is, like just they're all the children, oy vey.
Yeah, exactly.
They're so sacrilegious. Yeah.
As if they care about Easter, right? As if they care about Christianity or something.
Adam Best said, if Trump wants to pretend to be a good Christian boy on Easter, no more DACA deal isn't the way. What would Jesus do? He wouldn't cast out 800,000 people just because of who their parents are.
No fault of their own. They just happened to be here for 20, 30, 40 years for no fault of their own. They could figure out how to steal identities and papers to work, and they could figure out how to get through traffic and figure out their way around and all that shit, but they couldn't figure out how the fuck to get back to Mexico. I personally, don't ask me to feel bad for them. Don't ask me to buy the no fault to their own bullshit. So long as my kids are going to be sold into transgenerational national debt to subsidize the importation of these people. You want me to feel bad for their kids when the consequences of their presence is that my kids have to pay more taxes? And if my kids don't want to pay the taxes when they grow up, then they get thrown in jail? Fuck you. If it's between my kids and your kids, if it's between my people and your people, I'm siding with my people. I'm siding with my kids. I don't feel bad about it either.
Well, yeah, and Jesus was living he was talking to, well, his own people, really. And so what he was talking to people about how to live amongst themselves, right? You turn the other cheek or whatever. And this is within your own family. This is within your own tribe. Like, I don't see this in any way as he's telling Christians that they have to accept, they have to adopt black babies and
you have to put the children of other people before your own children. You have to put other people before your own interests. I don't think he's necessarily saying that. No, I'm not I'm not a practicing Christian. I guess I could say that I'm culturally Christian. My understanding of it is that the teachings of Christianity are good for holding a community together, right? And that's the purpose of it. You can't necessarily hold a community together by prioritizing the interests of people who aren't part of it. If you put the interests of invaders above the interests of people who actually live here, then the invaders are going to prevail. And we're talking about trespass, right? These people aren't just coming here with their hands. They're not just coming here because they have no choice. It's not like there are no other countries they can go to. It's not even like they have to leave the countries they're leaving. They're coming here voluntarily because they want stolen property. They want the government to take things from the people who already live here and give it to them. They want to be the beneficiaries of tax redistribution. I have no obligation. Even if I was Christian, I wouldn't have a Christian obligation to cater to that. I wouldn't have a Christian obligation to sell my own children into transgenerational debt to pay for it. That's insane. Would you, Matt? I know you probably wouldn't do this, but I'll ask it rhetorically anyway. Would you say a banker came up to you and was like, hey, I'm going to give you a 30-year mortgage on your house, and you actually don't have to make a single payment for 30 years. And you know why? We're going to have your kids pay it back. So we'll give you all the money right now. You can buy the house. You can live in it in 30 years. And then 30 years from now, we're going to have your kids make the payments.
And it's going to be double.
And it's going to be double. Yeah. And nobody fucking does that. If anybody,
this is the reverse mortgage meme. That's literally something that people have memed about.
But if anybody propositioned you would say, hey, we're going to sell your kids into transgenerational debt slavery to import all these third worlders and pay them to reproduce, you'd be like, no. I don't show me in the Bible. Show me in the Bible where Jesus said I have an obligation to let that happen.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. I mean, Jesus, he was a firebrand, he was a maverick, and he did not like people coming in and destroying what was sacred. And this country is sacred for us. You could think of it, our country as a temple, and so we wouldn't just let anybody come into our temple. So the idea that he's against having any kind of borders is it's pretty ludicrous. And I've done I had a chat with Nick Fuentes about this. It's a good video, top 3 myths of Christianity. So yeah,
well, I would say that most of the people that are pushing this myth that Christianity justifies open borders don't even believe in Christianity. They're just trying to use Christianity as a weapon against people who do believe in it. Just like how Alinskyite use capitalism against people who believe in free trade. Oh, you have principles? Here, let me distort them and string you up by them until I get all your property. Yeah, that's just basically what it is. That's how I see it. And people will say, oh, here's all these quotes from the Bible. Let me subjectively reinterpret them out of context to mean whatever the fuck I want them to mean. But it's like, at the end of the day, I don't think the Bible was written to prioritize the interests of outsiders over the interests of part of the in-group, right? If your in-group prioritizes the interests of outsiders over its own interests, your in-group's not going to survive. And Christianity is like a I mean, it is a religion, but it's like a group evolutionary strategy if you think about it. And what kind of group evolutionary strategy would it be if it if it didn't result in the intended effect? If it didn't allow the people who practice it to reproduce and pass their gene sets into the future? It'd be a pretty fucking bad one. If it prioritized the survival of other people above the survival of yourself, then Christianity itself would have already died out by now.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I think of it too. Like I think of religion as a mix of philosophical principles and whatever is necessary. It's the Stefan Molyneux meme. I am what is necessary.
Right. Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a tool used to build civilizations, and it's worked really well. And
well,
so,
it hits people on a lot of different levels too, because there's a lot of people that aren't capable of understanding the moral principles, which may underline a parable or something. Like abstract moral philosophy might be too much for a lot of people, but the really great thing I think about Christianity is it condenses a lot of those really hard to grasp moral principles into stories and into parables that are extremely relatable. And I think it's a great substitute for philosophy for people who just aren't smart enough to get philosophy. And I'm not saying that religion is for stupid people by any means, because I think there's a lot of a deep hidden meaning in there. I think there's a lot of interpretation. It does require a lot of brain power to get into this, to get into a lot of the more complex stuff. But I'm just saying that there's a lot of different layers, and it can be really good for people in your society who just don't have the cognitive ability to process moral philosophy. If they're scared of going to hell, sometimes that works better than saying, well, I don't want to violate a principle that I wouldn't want to do something that I wouldn't want done to me. You know, it's whatever it takes, I guess. Like you said, whatever is necessary to get people to behave and act right, I suppose.
Yeah. I've talked before about like spiritual racism, you know, and I think it's kind of the same way as sex, right? We want people to abstain from sex when they're young, so that they get into a committed relationship with someone. But we don't say, okay, continue to not have sex and never have sex. Well, unless you're MGTOW, which goes to the second debate there. But yeah, we wouldn't tell people that. We expect that at some point, the deferral of gratification is going to pay off in some way. And so, you know, it's the same thing with racism. It's like, yeah, you refrain from judging people by group characteristics or whatever, but at some point, you know, you get to the level of government, and that no longer applies, right? You have to you reap the benefits of the individualism and by being a collective. And yeah, this is this balancing act. And if you're strictly individualist, then or hyper individualist, it destroys the point of being individualist. In the same way that all of these other kind of deferrals of gratification that tame the more base biological impulses, it tames that in order to serve the purpose of sustaining your group.
Well, I don't know if I've ever even, excuse me, I don't know if I've ever even seen like a consistent individualism, right? It seems like when someone invokes individualism, they're doing it because they want to stop people they disagree with from organizing, coordinating, and dividing labor toward, you know, the achievement of some goal that they personally disagree with. And then they say, you're being a collectivist, and that's bad. They'll issue a moral condemnation off of, you know, being a collectivist. Stop being so divisive, except they don't apply any of their criticisms to themselves. They don't realize that what they've just done is they've divided people into groups of divisive and non-divisive. And then they're saying, don't be so divisive. Stop being so collectivist, when they're dividing people into groups of collectivist and individualist. And they still have their labels and shit. They'll still call people. They'll still say we. They'll still call people libertarians or socialists or racists. It's not like they're against collectivism. They're just against support the division of labor when people are dividing labor to accomplish something that they don't necessarily agree with. And I wish they would just be honest and say, I don't like this. But instead they wrap it in some, it's a principled stance to not like this. And you're unprincipled if you like it. And if you're unprincipled, you disagree with me. And you're immoral if you disagree with me. And that's why I got sick and fucking tired of the libertarians, dude, is because, I came to a different conclusion than a lot of them on whether territorial defense should be produced. I think there should be a border. I don't think immigrants should be allowed to pour in and have access to tax funded resources. I think that further damages victims of taxation for the same reason that the state damages them. But libertarians look at that and they go, well, I don't like what you're saying, therefore you're immoral. I can't argue against it, but you're a collectivist and you're immoral. And they never fucking apply their own criticisms to their self, not realizing that they're being divisive, that they're being collectivists. Not that I care, because I don't have a problem with collectivism or whatever. I don't call people a collective. I wouldn't call you a collectivist just to beat you over the head with some mean word because I disagree with you. It's not the way I work. I'm going to argue with you and I'll try to prove my case, or I'll try to show you why you're wrong. Or if I realize that the conversation's not going anywhere, I'll walk away. But the moral condemnation thing, what's the point of getting into a debate if you're just going to morally condemn somebody? Because for me personally, I won't even debate you if I find you morally reprehensible. I think you're going to initiate force against me regardless of the outcome of the debate. There's no fucking point in debating you. It's not a debate. So I understand. I guess I don't understand why these people do this.
Yeah, I had this video, Am I Still a Libertarian? A long time, sometime last year. And I would say I think a good way to phrase it is I'm a common sense libertarian. I think I'm getting this from G.K. Chesterton. He kind of called himself the common sense man or philosopher. And yeah, I'm either a common sense libertarian or a principled nationalist or something. One of those two, but principles is, like Cantwell says, it's just a tool to beat people over the head with, at least in this day and age. I wish it wasn't that way.
When it goes back to the whole expectation of the anti-white left that we should extend the protections of principles we believe in to people who don't believe in those principles. Otherwise, we're not being intellectually consistent or morally consistent. Not where I would argue that we would be inconsistent if we extended the protections of our principles to people who reject them. And that's something that came up during the debate between Adam and Chase. Adam's constantly saying, well, these principles are universal and inalienable. Like he just read the Constitution or something. It's like, well, no, they're not universal or inalienable. They are normative. They only apply to people who accept the premise. And if you reject the premise from which the protections of the principle arise, why should those protections be extended to you? Why should the rapist get to appeal to the non-aggression principle in his own defense when his victim shoots him in the fucking head, or pulls a knife on him or something in their own defense? It's a reversal of the burden of proof, and it strikes me personally as a bit sociopathic to try to put it on somebody who's defending themselves, saying you have a moral obligation to extend the protections of your principles to people who don't believe in your principles. Like, fuck you.
Yeah, the libertarians, I think they're just LARPing as people. They're just LARPing as like free thinkers in a sense, because they're really not. They've been told that, a lot of them anyway, the libertarians, they've been told, non-aggression principle, and they don't bother to think through any of these other consequences. They don't bother to explore new areas or receive new data as it comes in, right? They reject the new data. And so it's unfortunate, because I used to think that libertarianism, these are the people who get it, they know that there's something wrong with the system. And I've just,
and then you realize that a lot of people are just attracted to libertarianism because they've made a lot of really bad decisions in their life for which they don't want to be held personally accountable. And so personal freedom, man, personal liberty. Don't hold me responsible for my actions. Everything that's ever happened to me in my life, it just happened to me. It wasn't my decisions that led to it. I'm
Well,
in jail for
that's how
drugs.
it is nowadays. I don't think it was always that way, but it is that way now, and it's because there's this vacuum that's created because everyone has left libertarianism and gone to the alt-right. And
So what so you think that like libertarianism as such, what remains of it is just the libertines and the leftists who came in when they realized that there was a lot of there was a lot of excitement in the libertarian movement due to the whole Ron Paul phenomenon, right? And then once Ron Paul went away in 2012, you saw people kind of go their own way, and that's when you saw the rise of the alt-right. And myself, even I was part of the libertarian movement pretty heavily until a year or two ago.
But the leftists are right that Ron Paul is kind of, he's that pipeline to the alt-right. Like, there's some truth in that.
Actually, I just wrote a chapter for a book called "In Their Own Words." It's a it's a book that's being put out. It's a bunch of different writers that each wrote chapters talking about the alt-right movement. My chapter was specifically on the libertarian to alt-right pipeline. They talk about it like it's the school to prison pipeline, but no, it's the libertarian to alt-right pipeline. Is kind of a funny thing because you get into libertarianism, and if you get in as like a Ron Paul person back in 2012, you realize the futility of trying to like make political gains, right? And you realize that the Republican Party is pretty fucked, just as fucked as the Democrat Party, and that got people very disenchanted, and it's what led to all these like the counterculture. I don't want to call them countercultural movements, but it did spawn something. People were looking for more. So when Ron Paul went away, you had all these left libertarians from the Libertarian Party come in and try to snatch all these people who were motivated by Ron Paul up, but that just created a lot of friction between like your anarcho-communists and your mutualists and the more like pro-capitalist libertarians. And I think that's actually a lot of what spawned the alt-right. I think even the guys from TRS have talked about their own beginnings as being they started as a group called the He-Man Mutualist Haters. Like they were sick of mutualists, and so they kept being pushed further and further right, or further and further authoritarian. It's like, at what point do we just say fuck it? Fuck these nihilists, fuck these mutualists, fuck these people who don't really believe in anything other than having no limits on them. Why would we extend the protections of our principles to these people? Why not just go full fascist or full authoritarian on these people? It's not like they have any right to appeal to non-aggression in their own defense. It's not like they have a right to appeal to a libertarianism in their defense, because if you get down to it, they reject all the principles that libertarianism is based on, despite the fact that they call themselves libertarians and surround themselves with people who also call themselves libertarians. So at the end of the day, it's like, why would I expend any energy defending you at all, or extending the protections of my principles to you at all, when you would not reciprocate? You would throw me under the bus. You would force me to subsidize my own dispossession, my own replacement. And if I didn't want to, you would gladly laugh and clap and cheer as I was thrown in a fucking cage over it, just like they did with Cantwell, right? So it's like, why? Fuck them. I hope the state crushes them. That would be great. I hope they all go to jail. I hope they all get deported, and they would want the same for me. So it's like, you're not being consistent. It's like, you're not going to hold that over my head. I don't fucking care about being consistently extending the principles of protections of principles. People reject them. Fuck you. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, we are a Christian podcast. So. But no, I was gonna say that like libertarians, they're really just frustrated. They enjoy being frustrated. That's been my assessment for a while. They just enjoy, or somehow they're getting something out of it, right? Because they know that there's something wrong with society, but they don't want to actually go towards the real problem, which would be race or the JQ or something like that. And so if you say those topics are off limits, then all that you're left with, I mean, unless you want to completely deny reality and become an SJW, is just to say, well, both parties are screwed up, and so I'm just going to be this third option.
But then if you push them, they do the exact same thing that like the the more Antifa types do, or the more like explicitly social Marxist types do, and they'll say, oh, well, it's because of historical oppression and white people colonized all these places and stole all these resources. And that's why all these non-whites just can't achieve what white people have been able to achieve. And you start getting that, and you ask yourself, like, what's the functional difference between these people and the Democratic Party at this point, you know? See, somebody asked me something.
Yeah,
Once
that was valid thought.
it says once you're talking about government power, non-aggression is out the window. Yeah, well, of course, the government is a monopoly on the production of territorial defense. It has a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence. Of course, it's out the window once you start talking about government power. However, it doesn't follow from that there needs to be a monopoly on the production of territorial defense, or that there needs to be a monopoly on legitimate violence. We wouldn't tolerate such a standard when it comes to gun ownership, right? If we had a monopoly on gun ownership, a lot of people would be a lot less safe. We acknowledge this when we argue in favor of the Second Amendment, yet somehow this all goes out the window when we talk about the production of territorial defense in general. We don't need to have a monopoly on the production of territorial defense where the monopolist uses violence against people who want to provide that service better than they can. We don't have to have arbitration services that are violent toward people in that way. I mean,
hey, I'm gonna bring valid thought in, because I think it'll be interesting. One, we can ask him if he really was trolling, and two, maybe we can iron out some of these things about the state, and then
yeah, we can. I don't really want to go full ANCAP on this.
Okay. Let's not go there.
I'm not gonna extend the protections of anarcho-capitalist principles to people who reject anarcho-capitalism.
Yeah,
that includes people like Valid Thought who say, I don't believe in the non-aggression principle. I say, fine, fuck you. I just won't extend the protections of the non-aggression principle to you.
All right. Well, the other reason is that he was watching the MGTOW debate, so maybe he has something to say.
Sure.
So yeah. Anyway, I'll give my thoughts on the MGTOW debate. So it was Global Man versus Mark Collette. And now the thing I'll say right off the bat is that Mark Collette's not married. He doesn't have a family. And I think he's 39 or 37 or something like that. And so that actually never came up in the discussion, which I thought was interesting. A Global Man said he purposely didn't go there or something because of his principles. But yeah,
he didn't bring up personal details about him to try to undermine his arguments.
Well, what do you think? Does that have any bearing on a person's? I agree it doesn't change the argument, but does it change the credibility of their argument if they haven't lived a certain experience that they're talking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, it could, right? Because you're not going to take like workout or dieting advice from a fat person. But then at the same time, I guess someone who's a rapist could argue that rape is morally wrong. And you're not going to say, well, I disagree with you because you raped somebody. They could be right. They just might not be consistent. You could like somebody who smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day, right? That don't smoke cigarettes, you're gonna get cancer. It's like, well, you smoke cigarettes, so I'm gonna smoke. Like that doesn't invalidate the argument, but yeah, it could be the case at a certain point where someone who doesn't have the actual firsthand experience of the thing, or if their firsthand experience of the thing is entirely antithetical to what they're advocating, it could be the case that their credibility is diminished in their advocacy of it. Sure.
Yeah. But I guess in the case of MGTOW, it's like this is where I was at before I got married, is that I understood all the problems with the legal system and everything, but I still didn't call myself a MGTOW. I was just essentially like, okay, this just means I have to have higher standards, and if I don't meet those standards, then I'm not going to go, dipping my dick into poisonous fruit traps or whatever. Fruit traps of fly traps of hell. But so I just said I'm not going to do that unless I meet these standards, you know, and that sort of pushed me to work harder to get there. So I don't like this idea that
Hey, man.
if oh hey Val thought welcome.
Go ahead.
And
Sorry, continue.
yeah, I just don't like this idea that you have to have the lived experience in order, because I talk about parenting and I'm not a parent yet. You are actually, I believe.
Yeah, I've been a parent for 4.5 months, but I talked about parenting before I was a parent. I was, I've always been in favor of peaceful parenting and not hitting your kids. And I'd say something like that on social media. People would be like, immediately, how many kids do you have? How many kids do you have? And it's like, would you use that same argument if I was making a case against like child rape? Like, I'm against sexually assaulting children. And you were like, how many kids do you have? How many kids do you have? You see where it's like, it's kind of fucked up. So in that sense, I mean, it could diminish my.
Have you ever been raped, Jared?
Yeah, no.
Well, then how can you talk about it?
It could diminish my credibility as a parent. I could see where it would diminish my credibility as a parent in somebody else's eyes if I said I don't have any kids, but I'm against spanking. I could see where they could come to that conclusion. But at the same time, I don't think it's a hard case to make that spanking is detrimental to children. And I don't think that you would necessarily have to have the experience of having been a parent to come to that conclusion.
Was Jesus pro spanking?
Eesh.
Okay.
I've heard some people say that spoil the rod, spare the child was actually against spanking, but I'm not well versed enough on Christianity.
Well, I don't know that it was against it, but I've heard that actually means it's the spare the rod, spoil the child thing. They were talking about discipline in terms of education. So that's what I've heard. How people get
I've
around
heard
that.
A couple different interpretations of that, sure, but yeah, I don't know that Christianity necessarily condones hitting kids. It may have been the case in the past that Christians physically discipline their children, but I don't know that it's necessarily a requirement of Christianity.
I saw someone in the chat was saying kids need spanking. Just in general, if people want to debate this, I think it would be a great thing to debate. And I'm sure we could both find people on the anti-spanking side. So yeah, if you're pro spanking or anything, send me a message and we can set up a debate if that's in your interest.
I'm pro spanking, Matt. But that's
how many kids do you have?
I don't have any kids.
Oh, we'll see. I'm not letting you anywhere near my kids.
No, I understand that, but I was a particularly bad kid, and I don't think that my behavior would have been changed. Like my brother and sister weren't spanked; they didn't need to be. They were pretty well behaved. But
so as a gaslit child, you would say that you deserve
a gaslit child.
Yeah, a gaslit child. Well, you believe that you deserve to be hit by people who are bigger than you, right?
No, I believe that without some sort of physical discipline, that I was going to continue to press and push the boundaries beyond what I did, and that would have caused harm to myself and to others in drastic and dramatic ways.
Yeah, but how do you know that? Like,
because my motivation as a kid was to get people to hit me. Because my father was very much on this non-aggression principle, in that we're just never going to do anything physical ever, and going to go by that. And it's just going to be logic and reason, logic and reason. My whole goal in life was to upset him and to piss him off and to disrupt everything in my family because I didn't like them. And why didn't I like them? Well, because they told me to do things, and I didn't want to do things. Whether it be go to bed or, eat this food or do this at this time, whatever it might be. I never liked the authority of anybody telling me to do anything. So they would always try to convince me or do some sort of punishment, like go to your room kind of stuff.
Yeah, well,
try to get me to behave. And I was
nobody wants to be told what to do.
I don't know if it follows. I don't know if it follows from that. I don't know if it follows from that saying if my dad didn't hit me to make me go to bed, then I would have done more dangerous things.
No. He didn't hit me to go to bed. I mean, no. There were very seldom times where I was hit, but it was times where I was, you know, hitting other people, pushing, you know.
So how does that
coming at people with knives?
How does that logic work? Like, you shouldn't hit people, and I'm going to teach that to you by hitting you.
Well, for example, like when I was 7, I like threw my mom into a cabinet and broke all this glass around her, and then punched through the remaining glass in the cabinet right next to her head, and I was holding up the glass like I was going to kill her. So what is my dad supposed to do at that point?
Well, that is
like, well,
a
son, this would
complicated
not be a
scenario.
reasonable situation. Well, but that's the sort of thing that, like I said, like my brother and sister, very well behaved, never had any real problems. There was never any need for really spanking or anything.
Like, yeah. So you were 7? You were 7
at that time, but I mean, I had been doing stuff from the start. I was never happy.
Okay, well,
like,
I still wouldn't say
that
that was like. I still wouldn't hold you responsible for that at 7. I mean, I would hold your parents more responsible at the age of 7 if you pushed your mom into a glass case.
Well, right, but what I'm saying is that let's say that sort of thing happened in your family, and you're sitting there watching your wife, you know, come close to getting killed by your son. Is there going to be no sort of punishment, or are you just going to sort of try to talk?
Well, I think there's a huge difference between saying no punishment and physical violence. I think there's some middle ground in between no punishment and physical violence, right?
I mean, yeah, sure, but that's the thing. Like, you try certain things, right? You try, like, go to your room. You try sit in the corner. You try, you know, you're grounded. You try no video games. You try blah 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 blah. And at a certain point, it's like the kid, me in this instance, you know, you're already saying, you know, no dinner and whatever, and the kid is just coming out and just going nuts.
It's hard to honestly, it's hard to comment on your situation because we don't have enough information, nor will we be able to obtain enough information to have like the full context in the course of this conversation. But we can say that you are justifying the fact that you were hit as a kid after the fact, and you're using maybe I was violent as a kid, but the question still comes up: where did you learn that behavior? Why were you acting like that? Where were your parents? It's not like these behaviors occurred in a vacuum. Everything you did, you learned it from.
What I would argue is that my brother and sister are 2 and 4 years older than me, and they never had such sort of problems, and they never had such sort of interactions with their parents.
Okay, but that still doesn't follow from there that it still doesn't follow from there that violence against children is necessary. I mean, there might be some extreme cases where it's hard to discipline a children, but it doesn't follow that violence is necessary, right?
And the thing I would say is just, if you look at the facts, if you look at some of the research that's been done by people like Elizabeth Gershoff has done studies on spanking, and the evidence indicates that spanking or hitting or disciplining, corporal punishment with your kids, it just teaches them in the moment to stop what they're doing, but it actually makes them more likely to act up in the future. And so it does the opposite of the
intended effect,
intended to accomplish. Which you can understand, because I know you're big on economics and stuff like that. You know.
Well, what do you do? I mean, what Val said just now kind of confirms that, right? He said he constantly pushed out because he wanted to be hit, so he kept going and kept pushing out and kept pushing out and kept lashing out and kept acting out because he wanted it to escalate. So that would almost kind of confirm the evidence that violence against children does make children want to act out more.
Well, it was mainly because I knew that, especially in my family, that if you get physical, you lose. That was always the understanding and the principle, was that if you have to push something to the point where it gets physical, you've lost the argument. So my whole
that's how it works in real life.
Like,
that's how it works in real life too.
I need to make you hit me. Well, yeah, exactly, and I agree. And that's why I would get into these whole situations where it was, in order to make you lose, I need to make you get violent, right? So that's what I would sort of do. And at a certain point, like the parent has to be like, all right, well, we're actually getting in the car because, we're getting in the car. Like, I don't know what to say. At a certain point, you can't tolerate what your kid is doing.
Wait, so the principle is if you escalate to violence, you've lost the argument. So your father lost the argument.
Yes. He would lose the argument. Yes. But if he was hitting me, yeah, for sure.
But
And
I mean,
so
what you're
that's-
talking about,
But he wins the war, right? He gets.
you're talking
me in the
about like,
car.
hold on, you're talking about like putting people in the car now, just to look like that particular example. I mean, you could use.
I'm thinking of a particular example.
You
in
could
my head.
use.
I'll
You could
explain it
use.
real quick if you want.
You could use physical force to put a child in a car, like pick them up, like put them in a car like that. Obviously, they need to be under your supervision. You need to leave. You need to leave. That's just the way it is. But at the same time, there's a difference between using force to put them in a car and using force to put them in a car and then hitting them across the face or something, right? You don't necessarily need to do that.
Well,
I was beat up quite a bit as a kid. I had it a lot harder than most people. I was made to sit on my knees for hours at a time on salt on hardwood floors. I was backhanded across the face, smacked across the face, punched in the face, had my head stomped. I was beat up as a kid by my parents, and I would never say that it was necessary or that it deserved it. And I could hardly imagine ever using any of those tactics against my own son, even if I thought he was acting out. So it's hard for me to see where anyone would think that those things would be justified. In my experience, it was because my parents lost patience. It was because my parents, just I don't know what to say about it. They weren't good enough at being parents because they were using violence against me as a kid, saying that I should know better. But it's like, if I should know better, then why not just reason with me, right? And
So
I'm sure that you were smart enough to be.
Jared, just to play devil's advocate, then what would you do if your son does something that you don't want him to do? How would you go about, I guess, showing him that that's not what he should be doing?
Negotiation, right? I mean, there's lots of things. My son doesn't even talk yet, number one, but let's imagine that he could, right? There's lots of things that my son depends on me for, like even to just stay alive. And I'm obviously not going to deprive him of any of that, but there are other additional extra things I'm sure that he'll come to appreciate over time. And if he doesn't want to cooperate with me, then there's no reason that I should cooperate with him. I think there's plenty of parents who are able to achieve this without resorting to violence. My fiance has 4 sisters. None of them, their parents never used physical violence against them ever. And they all turned out pretty wonderful. I know that people make the anecdotal case that I was beat up and I was beat as a kid and I turned out just fine. Yeah, I can make that case myself too. I was beat up as a kid and I think I turned out just fine, but it doesn't mean I wouldn't have been better if I hadn't been beat up. It doesn't mean I couldn't have learned the lessons that I learned through the beatings any other way, right?
See, I think there's a distinct differentiation that I want to add. Like, obviously, beating is different than spanking.
I don't agree. I don't agree.
Okay, well, I look at spanking as like a discipline in order to correct behavior, whereas beating is like a frustration and an intolerance.
I think that both things are intended to correct behavior, and I think both things are born out of frustration and intolerance. I don't differentiate between spanking and beating.
Well, I mean, there are people who have rules in their house where it's like, if you don't do X, you're going to get spanked. If you don't do X, you're going to get spanked.
Yeah, and then people like that shouldn't have kids.
No, that's fine. But what I'm saying is that those are rules and parameters with consequences, as opposed to like, oh my God, my kid's acting out and I'm going to beat the shit out of him because I'm frustrated and I can't be a parent. It's
from
like,
there's no difference from the perspective of the child, though, so it's irrelevant. The child doesn't know the difference. If the child was capable of knowing the difference, you could just reason with the child and you wouldn't need to beat him, right?
No, because if you set out beforehand, and I disagree with this mode of parenting, but I think that there is legitimacy to it. If you set out beforehand that you said to the kid, okay, if you don't do A, B, C, and D, you get 2 spanks for this, 5 spanks for this, 10 spanks for this, or whatever, then you have reasoned with the kid.
I don't think the
set up the
negotiation. I don't
consequence,
think the
you know?
negotiation aspect of it changes it, because the child doesn't have the capacity to abstain from the negotiation process. The child doesn't have the capacity to consent to it any more than the child would have the capacity to consent to like a sexual act. So I don't think I'm negotiating with the children. Therefore, when the child doesn't meet my expectations, I get to hit him. I think it's just setting up extra steps to justify shitty parenting, honestly.
I don't agree with that form of parenting, but I also
I know you don't. I'm just giving you my comments on it.
No, I would say though that form of parenting and that form of spanking isn't like punitive in that the parent is frustrated and unable to deal with the kid. It's just,
but what I'm saying though is that there's been studies done on this, and the kid can't tell the difference between the punitive stuff and the parent not knowing. There's also been studies done where parents, when self-reporting, said, I am very calm-headed and I never lose my temper, and these are always agreed to punishments ahead of time. But then when they go and actually look at the parent, it turns out that the parent wasn't being forthcoming about their punishment techniques, and they were actually
want to come off as great. Yeah.
Right. And then they were actually hitting a lot harder. They were actually hitting more times, like in these controlled experiments where they were only supposed to use a certain amount of spanks on the butt, a certain amount of force, but they weren't adhering to the limits of the limits of the experiment that they supposedly agreed to, because they thought no one, when they get into a position where nobody's looking and they're not going to be held accountable for their actions by other adults, things tend to be a little bit worse, right? My parents would probably, if you could have asked them back then, say that they did the best they could with the knowledge they had at the time, and that, we didn't do anything to ever purposely, intentionally hurt him. We were only trying to correct his behavior, and none of it was vindictive, or we weren't angry or anything like that. But at the same time, I've seen the anger. I've been smacked in the face enough times to know like what that looks like, right? And I understand that people generally aren't going to be honest about how they discipline their kids, because we acknowledge, something in us knows that it's bad, right? To like hit somebody, even if you have like the purest of intentions, like I'm going to correct your behavior right now, even if you genuinely believe that, you still know that it's a bad look to be hitting somebody who's completely defenseless to you, has no decision to not live with you, right? That person can't get away from you. I would say that your obligation to them is higher than it would be to like a normal stranger, because you put them into such a state of incapacity. So like you as a 7-year-old pushing your mom into like the cabinets or whatever, what situation led up to that? What was your home life like that led up to that? Your parents have to own responsibility for that in some sense, rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to punch you in the face because you threw your mom into a counter. I could see maybe physically restraining you until such time that you calm down or something like that, just to protect you from harming others, or protect you from harming yourself. But at the same time, it's not to say that you as a 7-year-old are deserving of a physical punishment or violence administered by people that you didn't choose as parents and that you can't get away from, right?
Right. Well, my parents actually bought a paddle on their honeymoon. So
like to hit kids with? Yeah. Damn, dude.
They bought it in France. It said for unruly children aged 2 to 72. They had a little picture of 2 kids bent over a fence in a field. But
that tradition and practice generally disgusts me, man. Like the idea, like think about it. Like
it's just very old school, man.
And it is, but you think about it. We hold our children. People will hold their children to higher standards than they hold other adults. Like if an adult is insubordinate to you at work, doesn't listen to you, destroys your company's property, you don't punish them by, you don't administer a corporal punishment. You don't beat them with a paddle or a yardstick or smack them across the face. You reason with them. You give them a warning, or maybe you fire them. Right? The real world, your kids see that too. They see that you're not hitting adults who disagree with you. They're seeing that you're not hitting people that you don't like. But then they see that you hit them, and you say, "Well, my parents, they say they love me, but they hit me." And then they don't love any of these other people, but they don't hit these other people. So maybe my parents don't care about me as much as they care about what people think about them.
Yeah, again, I agree that in most circumstances, and that's where I look at these studies and whatnot, that in most circumstances, hitting kids is, spanking kids is a bad idea. But I also think that there are exceptional cases, because I feel like I was one of them. You live in Maine, right? Do you know the Elan School?
No.
No, well, it's been shut down, but it was a placement school. that I was sent to for 27 months. I think there are extreme circumstances where there are certain kids who it does need to be physical correction, just as there are, and my point of this is look back through time. It seems like, and I know the studies say people spank their kids as much today as they did before, but I just don't believe that if you go back, where it's 1800s or whatever, and people are using the switch in class, those people turned out much more disciplined and much more rigorous, much more hardworking. Blah blah blah.
I don't mean to like cut you off, and I'm not trying to be rude. But I think our audience is kind of struggling with this topic on Easter Sunday, so maybe we should.
Well, the chats. Some people are enjoying it. Some people are saying, some people are very opinionated. Of course, it's a touchy topic. But let's see. Someone asked, "Do you think that it should be illegal for parents to physically reprimand their kids?" Which, I think France passed something about that, and maybe Canada has some laws. But in the States, we don't really have laws against
reprimand. Like if I need to grab my kid to prevent him from running into traffic, I don't think that should be illegal. But I'm in favor of banning any violence against children that would be banned against anybody else. If I wouldn't have the right to spank you, Matt, I don't think I should have the right to be able to spank my son.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have the right to indoctrinate Matt into a religious group either. But you could do that to your kids. I mean, the more and more government control you put into parenting, the worse the results are going to be, I feel.
Well, I don't disagree with you on that, but I don't.
And it's not just that you wouldn't be able to do it against me. It's also you wouldn't. A more appropriate analogy is: would you be able to do it to a handicapped person or like a midget or something?
Or somebody else.
Because they're smaller,
right?
Children are smaller, so you got to take that into account.
But I could get midgets drunk.
Well, I agree with valid. I agree with you on the premise that getting government involved in parenting is gonna lead to some bad results, right? But in the same vein, we wouldn't use that argument to make the case that there shouldn't be punishments for people who sexually assault a child, right? We wouldn't look at a child rapist and say, well, we wouldn't want to get the government involved in parenting because that's just going to be a bad outcome. We would still, even though there's not a more perfect outcome, a more perfect solution, we would still have no problem with the government being used to protect that child in that case, right?
Right, of course. But what I'm saying is that there's already pretty stringent laws against like beating kids and whatever, and like when it gets excessive. And I don't think we need additional things to get more and more nuanced about each particular thing, because then, like you said, eventually it becomes, I grab a kid from getting hit by a car and, I'm going to jail for 3 years for beating my kid.
Sure. We certainly wouldn't want it to be that. We wouldn't want it to be a case where you're like legitimately protecting them from physical danger, like coming their way, and then you get like. But
it already is the case that you can't like beat your kids, right? I mean, you beat your kids, and if the kid says anything, or the school or whatever,
you can spank them, and spanking is beating. I mean, it's just, and you say that it's done with a specific intent, and that's what differentiates it from beating. But as studies have shown, that's the same either way from the perspective of the child. So, I mean, it is still legal to beat your kids as long as you frame it as spanking.
Yeah, but I think that more people would agree with me than would agree with you that there's a difference.
Okay, and that's fine. Maybe more. I think more people probably would. I think just to comment on that, I think more people would agree with you than would agree with me, because studies show that 70 or 80% of people still beat their kids and call it spanking. So I'm not unaware of the fact that of what popular opinion is with regard to spanking, but at the same time, an appeal to popularity isn't exactly an argument against the validity of my argument, right?
Sure, but what I'm trying to say is that you're not differentiating.
More people.
You're not
more
allowed
people
for any
voted for Clinton than voted
differentiation
for Trump, and yet we have Trump in office, right?
But you're not allowing for any differentiation between somebody who gives their kid 3 spanks on the butt versus somebody who stomps on their kid's face.
I can differentiate between the severity of a beating without making special exceptions for some types of beating and saying that they're not beatings. I can differentiate between one swat on the ass in terms of severity and a punch in the face, but it doesn't mean they're not both still beating.
Okay, so if we're in a bar, let's say, right, and we have a disagreement and I smack you in the face, have I given you can I then go outside, tell my friends I beat that guy? I gave him a beating.
Whether
I
you
don't think
slap me in
so.
the face, whether you slap me in the face or punch me 3 times, I can go to the police officers and I can press charges for assault either way.
For an assault, yes, but
because you assaulted me. So
assaulted,
we
yes,
wouldn't
I
necessarily
assaulted
use
you.
the term
I'm just
beating.
saying-
We wouldn't necessarily
Exactly.
use the term beating in that scenario, but we would use the term assault, and we wouldn't differentiate. It might be, you know, an aggravated assault or something
So-
like that. We might use additional terms to describe the crime against me, but we wouldn't differentiate between the slap and the punch as one being assault and the other not being assault. They're both still assault.
No, but we would differentiate between it being a slap and a beating. And what I'm saying is that when you say 70-80% of people still
changing context.
I think what you're doing is you're conflating beating with spanking in your statistics when you say 70-80% of people still beat their kids and call it spanking. When what I'm saying is that there's a difference between spanking and beating, and it's clear we know the difference.
But we've already addressed that disagreement, and we've already addressed that disagreement. And as I said, I'm not going to agree with you on your perception that spanking isn't beating. So we can drop that and move on. We don't need to rehash that for a third time.
Okay, fine, but then the question is, does the government have to come in and prevent people from beating their child? And what I'm saying is, it already does prevent them from doing, you know, what I would call beating, what you would call, you know, part of beating.
Thought, do you think?
You see what I'm saying?
Do you think that? Children...
Yeah, I'll let Matt ask the question just to respond. Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I'm an anarcho-capitalist, dude. I don't want the government to be providing any service. I don't think that those services should be monopolized. So you're not going to make a case strong enough against government action that I'm not gonna agree with.
Right.
So,
I actually want to talk to you about that. And my question is, and I asked this in the chat, was what role do you feel the government has, and what do you think the government should do? You know, because there is a state, right? So outside of military,
well, do you differentiate between the government and the state, or do you just think they're
no? I mean, the government. No, they're the same thing.
The same thing to you.
Well, the state sort of exists, and the government is the operating mechanisms underneath it. But there's no state without a government. Really, right? Is there a state without a government?
I would say there. I think the two are different, but it's not important. I was going to ask you, do you think that children are property of the parents?
No, I don't.
Okay. So how do they get away with being able to assault their children? Or how does that morally justify?
Because I think essentially what people have come to the conclusion is that if you're doing a misdemeanor assault against your kid, then they're going to call it parenting. And if you're doing a felonious assault, then you're going to be put in jail. I think that's pretty much where people have come to.
Okay, legally, okay, that's where we are legally, but that doesn't mean it's there's a moral difference between those two.
No, you're right, and I would agree that morally you shouldn't hit your kids, but I would also say that there are circumstances that come up in life that require you to go against your own morality in several ways. Several times, like you shouldn't morally
that, actually. I can accept that answer.
Blah, blah, blah,
I can accept that answer. If you're saying that it's if you think it's necessary for you to act immorally sometimes, I can accept the answer and accept that I'm not going to be able to argue you out of it. You know what I mean? I mean, if you're not gonna if you're committed to acting immorally out of necessity, then no amount of argument's going to talk you out of it, right?
But the question is it necessary? Right.
Exactly. Is it necessary? Is it necessary? Is always the question. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I think it's in rare circumstances necessary. Probably like 1 out of every 25, 30 kids, it's going to be necessary because they're going to be really #problematic. You know what I'm saying? So.
Well, I do think that there are personality differences between children, and some might be more like antsy. They want to do things more often. Every kid is going to be different. That's true. But I wouldn't say that the right way to foster that child's uniqueness is through physical punishment.
Well, if their uniqueness is like to be a serial killer, you know.
You think? Are you saying that kids are just born serial killers? That's.
I think some people are born bad. Yeah.
No. So I think people might be born with like the potential. I think maybe some people are born with the potential to be super serial killers, but you know what turns them into serial killers? It's when their parents abuse them.
That's fair. I'm just saying.
You're putting the cart before the horse.
But you see like 2-year-old kids maliciously beating up cats and like setting fire to things. It's like, geez, these are evil monsters. Like somebody needs to kill these kids out before they kill somebody.
I don't think kids just do that for no reason. I think that they.
Oh, what do you mean? That they don't blow up frogs and
I'm not saying that they don't.
I'm
not saying that they don't do it. Hold on. Listen to the full sentence and respond. Okay. I said I don't think that they do it for no reason. It's not like they're just like, oh, I want to be evil. I want to be bad. I want to do bad things. There's, situations that lead up to that, and a lot of that's environmental. Some of it's not. Some of it's genetic. In other races, I mean, you get more aggression among kids, like in Africa, right? I mean, you see disparities between mestizos and whites when it comes to that. You see disparities between blacks and whites. So certainly there are problems with aggression in children, but at the same time, it's not purely biological, right? It's somewhat environmental.
Sure, but you don't always know that those. If you're not aware that genetic predisposition is in your child, which you're probably not going to be, right? Then you might not be aware of the environmental factors that you're presenting that's causing that, that's creating that. You get what I'm saying?
No, I don't. I don't understand how a parent could be unaware of the environmental factors impacting their kid. If you're unaware of what environmental factors impact your kid, then you're not doing a good job as a parent, then you're not paying enough attention to your kids.
Well, no, like let's say one of the environmental factors is, we live in the countryside as opposed to living in the city, right? Now, the parents don't have any idea that that's changing their kid in some way or whatever. That's just where they live. They're not considering that. That's where they live and have their job and blah, 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 blah. And then, 20 years later, a guy becomes a serial killer and you go, oh, well, it's because they were living in the countryside.
Farming leads to serial killers?
I'm sorry. I didn't
what
follow
I'm saying
the
is
example.
It's an involuntary environmental factors. Not like just beating their kid is the only environmental factor.
I'm gonna say we should pause this conversation.
Yeah, I'm ready to move on from it. Not to be disrespectful, but I'd like to. I would like to get a debate going on this another time. Maybe Valid Thought would like to debate somebody who's got the facts and everything memorized. I'll be honest. I'm a little bit too passionate about the subject to be fair-minded about it. I'm passionately anti-spanking.
Well,
so
passion can make for a good debate opponent.
Yeah, but I'm not going to change my mind. So
if I can suggest, the only thing I'd request of Matt is that we get back to what does Jared think the proper role of the state is? What are if you were going from scratch?
Well, Jared said he didn't want to talk about that. Okay. Somebody in the chat said, invite Molyneux. Yeah, Steph, if you're listening to this, Stefan, we would love to have you debate some people. There were a couple people in the chat too. Who was that guy? Mighty Whitey. If you want to, you feel like debating this, because he was even more hardcore on it than you. He's like, yeah, we need to gas the kids or something. Yeah.
I mean, I could answer the question on what I think the proper role of the state should be. It's not like I said this when we talked about it before, right, Valid? It's not like I don't think that there should be the functions currently provided by the government. I just don't think that the state needs to maintain a monopoly on those functions. A state is an expropriating property protector. If you're going to have a state, I think its role should be limited to protecting the property of the people who are forced to pay for it. Otherwise, I think that the production of territorial defense should be decentralized. There shouldn't be a monopoly on it. So again, I'm not against the production of territorial defense or the production of roads, the production of emergency services. I just don't see why any one group of people has to have a monopoly on those services where they use force to prevent competitors from entering the market and providing those services cheaper or more efficiently.
Now, I think that's fair, and I think that's a very good point. I think you could point to like the Postal Service and UPS as a good example, right?
Yep.
But the question becomes also, what do you do when you're talking about essential services? Like, I don't know if you've seen Gangs in New York, but it's a pretty accurate description of what happened in the southern part of New York City back in the 1800s, where they had privatized fire and privatized cops. And basically what you had is these people, the fire departments would set fires and then beat up beat the other crew so that they could put it out, so that they would get hired by the neighborhood. And they would, literally go to war with other fire departments. Police departments did the same thing, so that they would grow their, grow their business.
All these people had diplomatic immunity because they were part of the state, right? So they couldn't be sued.
No. They were all private companies. They weren't part of the state whatsoever. They weren't. So what do you do? They got away with not being sued because they depended on the fire department to put out fires.
Your question is, what do you do if a private company destroys a bunch of private property in an attempt to get someone to hire them? Say you sue the fucking shit out of them. They don't have diplomatic immunity. Why wouldn't you?
Well, because what happened in those situations is anytime you tried to go after the company, the state would come in and intervene.
Okay. So they had public protection from the state. It wasn't an entirely private situation, then, is what you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying is that the reason the state would intervene is because without those people, there would be no fire department whatsoever or no police department whatsoever. So it's like, okay, well, we could put these guys out of business, but then next fire, nobody's going to put it out. Or we could let these guys go around, and every once in a while, they're going to light a fire to pump their numbers and blah, blah, blah.
I mean, I could just as easily flip the question on you and say, well, what about cases where the state shows up to a fire and doesn't put it out because they don't think it's worth it? Right? What if the person whose building burns down in that case could have hired a private company to come and put out that fire? I mean, we could just as easily flip it around that way. We could point at things that happened in history and say that went wrong, and that's going to happen every single time. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. And we could point out just as many problems with government monopolization of the service in question, right?
But government right now does prevent like lawsuits and settlements or whatever for giant companies oftentimes, and let them get away with it. They're like, oh, you're going to sue Monsanto? Not happening, right? Like that happens.
I hate when the government protects large companies from the criminal liability of their actions. That's not a free market situation. They wouldn't be able to do that if they weren't using the government to shield themselves from liability.
I agree, but what I'm saying is that what I'm talking about as far as what happened with police and fire departments, essential services in New York City before the turn of the century is exactly what happens now with like farming and all kinds of different giant corporations, internet, whatever. You don't think they're going to come in and the government's going to stop you from suing Facebook? Of course they are, right? So that they're going to do that. They're still going to use government power to do those things.
Is this supposed to be news to me as someone who believes in anarcho-capitalism?
No, but what you said is, oh, we're just going to look to the past and think we're going to repeat the same mistakes.
I didn't say that. Whoa, when did I say that?
When I mentioned all the fire departments and
look to the past and recreate past solutions and hope everything.
No. What I'm saying is that you said, if you look to the past and we say, oh, we screwed that up, so we can't try it again.
I didn't say that.
Right?
I don't know what you're talking about, dude.
I thought that's exactly what you said. As far as,
Matt,
oh, we screwed up, so it's going to happen again. We screwed that up, so it's going to happen again. Isn't that what he said, Matt? My thought was that I said, oh, this happened with the fire department. You said, well, that won't necessarily happen again.
I think people are zoning out. So
yeah, I think that we're just kind of autistic.
Let's I want to get valid thoughts, comments about. First of all, you weren't trolling on the first debate, right? Those were your legitimate arguments.
Well, my point, and I made this point in a video, and you guys can laugh about it, but what I was trying to say is I was trying to just give basic examples. And I know everybody comes up with like, oh, jazz and basketball, ha ha ha. But I think that's just like, you're just trying to diminutize what I was saying.
Sure.
I'm saying that culture builds upon culture, builds upon culture. And that you can't just take out one piece of the puzzle and expect everything else to be fine. And that all the discoveries and cultural whatever that have happened in the past 200 years have been inclusive of all types of people. And you can't just say, oh, well, if we didn't have the black people here, everything would have been better. Because we have examples of where the black people weren't all over Europe.
Okay, But to go back to that debate, like,
Yeah.
do you understand the point that, like, the argument isn't everything would be better. The argument is that the important things would be better.
Well, but that's a matter of what you deem important. And I'm saying that
It is a matter of what I deem important, and
Correct.
I think it's pretty. It's not wildly controversial to say that like a country's murder rate or a country's economy or a country's GDP, well, not GDP, but a culture, a country, well,
culturally, I think we're in trouble. But
no.
Okay,
But you could argue that the culture would be better. I mean,
I don't know.
I think that there are some things that you can say are subjective, and culture definitely fits more into one of those things. I don't like rap music. I don't like a lot of these other ethnic dances, but I will admit that that's.
But what I'm saying is that you might not like rap, but if you might like rock and roll, and you might like all kinds of other things. There's so much. But one builds off the other,
But yeah, but the thing is that it's I like rock and roll, but that's probably because we don't have much else. Like
you could go back and listen to big band music. That's some seriously white music. Or you can go listen to like Polish folk music.
Okay, but if
none of these things even have to be spread physically, you can get this music over the internet. You don't have to have physical proximity to the people who created it. Same goes for recipes too.
It's a matter of whether or not they get created, whether or not they get invented in the first place. Rock and roll and jazz and pop music.
I don't think you really made the case though that these things got created, therefore we're better off.
Yeah, you're not making
I think we are better off. We're better off because our culture dominates the world.
And you got called out in that debate when someone said that was a broken window. It was Greg. You said that was like breaking windows, and it's a broken window fallacy because you're emphasizing the seen benefit to the exclusion of the unseen cost. It could be the case that we got those things, and we did well in spite of them. We could be even better off if we hadn't had the forced diversity that was required or ostensibly required to create jazz and basketball and rock and roll or whatever.
All the places that didn't have that diversity, Europe, still continued to exist, and none of those places have become as culturally dominant as the United States has in the past 200 years. Furthermore, I would argue that essentially every giant successful society, be it ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, the Holy Roman Empire, the British Empire, that those places have been diverse, and that a lot of their strength has come from bringing in the inventions.
And I think the citation's needed for saying that the United States is culturally dominant too, or not. Maybe we're economically dominant over most of the world, but American culture is technically white culture. White culture is diminished all around the world. Whites have gone from 30% of the population to 8% of the population. And the white culture that gave birth to America is dying out along with white people. When white people are gone, that culture is going to be gone with it. Asians aren't replicating American culture. Africans aren't replicating American culture. What are you talking about?
If you don't think that American culture is hegemonic throughout the world, you must not travel a lot.
If you think it's so self-evident, then point it out to me. What are you talking about, man?
Are you talking about Hollywood?
How about movies? You'll never see
made by Jews and exported all over the world. That's not American culture. That's Jewish culture. Jewish culture is a part of America.
This is the thing.
No, they're not. Jews are hostile foreign invaders.
Oh
what are you talking about?
This is the thing. You don't consider blacks Americans. You don't consider Hispanics Americans.
No, because they're not. They're not.
Yes, they are.
They were.
Blacks have always been here.
Americans.
The Jews have always been
as Americans.
They've all been here since the beginning of the country. I don't know what.
No, they haven't. What are you talking about? Most of them showed up since 1965.
The Jews.
The country started in 1965.
What are you talking about, dude? The Jews were major slave traders.
I'm talking about the country being 90% white, 95% white until 1965. You're talking about a negligible part of the population. Jews in America today are still less than 6 million people, and most of them immigrated here in the last 60 years. They're not Americans. Are you kidding?
Dude, there have been Jews since the beginning of this country, and you can hate them all you want, but they are the ones who created Hollywood.
You don't have to. Even if I did hate them, it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that I don't think they're Americans, that I don't accept them as Americans. I don't even accept Californians like you as an American.
I'm not a Californian. I live in Nevada.
You live there.
I want to say,
I live in Nevada, Las Vegas.
Whatever.
If Hollywood,
we're not part of the country either. Okay, so the 13 colonies, I guess.
Right.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
exactly.
Oh, come on. Okay. So go ahead, Matt.
Okay. If Jews represent American culture, then I don't want to have anything to do with America. Okay.
No, what I'm saying is that they're part of.
That's just bullshit. Jews are American culture.
The American people are not a single race of people. The American people no, they're not. Yeah. There have been black people.
America is a white country.
I had a conversation with somebody in my comments, and I had to look it up. I looked at the census in 1800, right? You could say that that's pretty close to the beginning of the country. And there were 5.4 million or so total people, and 900,000 of them were black slaves. So to pretend that the country was at any point 95%,
and they weren't citizens, and they weren't contributors to the tax system. They should go back to Africa.
Okay.
Oh, does that hurt your feelings, bud? He's making you
no,
exasperated.
It doesn't hurt my feelings. It's just not a real argument that's going.
Oh, well, your argument's not a real argument.
Practical solution.
I can be like that too. That's a great standard. No, your argument's not a real argument. I have to accept all these people as Americans because the government said that they're Americans. Fuck that. They're not Americans. They're not even white.
What I'm saying. So the people who founded the country was a very small group of people, right?
White people, right?
Yes. White people, mainly British white people.
And then the taxpayers who funded the country for the last 250 years were almost all of them were white.
Yes, I agree. Yes, I understand.
So America's a white country.
Those people, no.
Yeah, it was 95% white until 1965 when Jews in Congress changed immigration policy to import millions of non-whites. It was a white country for almost its entire history until hostile foreign invaders.
Is 1965 when is 1965?
You're never going to get me to accept Jews and Mexicans as Americans. We can stop that.
Is 1965 when blacks got the rights of citizenship? No, of course it's not. No,
1965 is when the demographics of the country started changing from 95% white down to its current rate of 63% white. When the government started importing non-whites en masse and paying them to reproduce at the expense of white people. This is a historically and demographically white country. Jews are not American, and neither are black people. You can say that they are on paper because the government says they are. I don't accept them as American. And there's nothing you can say that's going to make me accept them as American.
All right. Well, listen to me for a second here. Number one, black people were made citizens well before 1965.
I didn't say that. I didn't say anything about their citizenship. I'm talking about the rate of the demographics. I'm talking about white people being 95% of America
that's what I'm saying.
1965. I don't give a fuck if blacks were given citizenship 20 or 30 years earlier. I do not care. They should have been sent back to Africa.
You keep saying that, but they weren't. What I'm saying is that in 1965, blacks were already citizens.
I didn't fucking say that, retard. I did not say that blacks became citizens.
They were more than 5% of the population. They were more than 5% of the population.
Listen, dude.
They were more than 5% of the population.
Hey, listen, I did not say that blacks became citizens in 1965.
You did say that in 1965. You said in 1965 we were 95% white. Yes. And what I'm saying is that in 1965 there were more than 5% black people in this country.
But no, there weren't.
Yes. So the country was not 95% white in 1965. The blacks have was about 15% of the country.
No, that wasn't.
Yes. They have been. Yes.
You're wrong.
What do you mean? You think the country was 5% white and black in 1965?
Okay. I'm looking up data. 1830, we've got a white population of 82% and a black population of 18%.
Thank you very much. They've always been around 15% of the country. They always have been. So once they became citizens, there was none of this 95% white garbage.
I'm going to look up 1900 and see what, because I think they went down quite a bit and then they started to go up.
The main people who have come over since 1965 have not been black. They've been Hispanic. The black population is still 13%.
I didn't say that the majority of immigrants since 1965 were black, did I?
No, but what I'm saying is that a lot of people are worried about this demographic shift and talking about South Africa, when the reality is we should be talking about more like Brazil and Argentina, because the people who are going to take political control, who vote at about 50% in their own local elections, whereas blacks don't vote anyway, are the Hispanics. So everybody's worried about the blacks are taking over. The blacks, they're not doing anything. They're the same 13% they always have been. They still vote at like 15% in elections, so who cares? And it's just a matter of the Hispanics. Those are the ones you have to convince. And I think that Hispanics, a lot more of them, and a greater portion of them, are more amenable to sort of freedom aspects.
Not convinced, but deport, you mean?
Yes, sure.
Yes.
I would say that you deport every illegal person who's here, but if the government has
I'd say we deport every non-white, whether they're legal or illegal.
Well, but that I think is an untenable dream. That by the time you had any popular support for it, the tides would be turned and you'd be flipped, and they'd say, no, let's deport all the white people, because by the time you have any support, you're only going to be 25% of the population then.
And that's why it's going to happen before 1944. You're going to see mass secession movements and redrawing of the United States. You think white people, 2044 is when white people are projected to become a minority in the United States. And I don't think white people are going to let that happen. You're not going to see a Brazil type situation. You're not going to see a South Africa type situation, because white Americans just aren't going to let that happen to them. I'm not going to let it happen to me. I'm pushing for a main secession right now, even if I have to do the ballot initiative myself and go door to door collecting signatures. Right. So, I mean,
I think that what you're seeing is that you're seeing Trump, for example, when he got rid of the state deduction, right? The state income tax deduction off your federal returns, right? That is a huge, huge thing, right? So for states like Massachusetts and New York and California, where they have high state income tax, 13, 14%, they used to be able to deduct 35% of that. That means a lot of off their federal taxes, right? Now they can't deduct it whatsoever. And that has led an exodus of people from California, New York, Massachusetts towards the interior. So I think instead of seeing just like secession that quickly, you're just going to find more and more white people leaving coastal places, continuing to allow it to happen, continuing to allow the demographic shift to happen, continuing to allow 2 million people a year legally to become citizens. And they're going to keep doing that because they want to feel good. Meanwhile, they're going to move to Iowa, and they're going to move to Kentucky, and they're going to move to, Oklahoma and shore up there. And eventually it's going to be white people who are all the taxpayers in the center, and all the people who are taking all the other stuff to, all the government gifts on the exterior of the country. And those places will be hellholes. In the middle will be nice. But, I think that it's going to go on a lot longer than, 20 years, because there's too much money supporting the system.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's the process is going to take longer than that to play out. But it's the 20 years thing is, well, I think 26 years is when whites are projected to become a minority. I don't think that the moment whites become minority that it's going to be game over, right? I think.
Right. Can you guys see my screen at all?
No. You're black, dude.
And yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, you're right. There, even until 1965, it looks like white people were 84% of the country and blacks were 11%. But still, I mean, at that point,
too. Yeah, the Chinese building the railroad.
Yeah, It says Asians were 1% at that point in time. So
okay, I'm looking at the data.
They built the railroad in the 1800s.
1900. Now I'm just looking at a chart, so I'm kind of estimating. 1900, it was like 85% white and the rest black, and then the peak was like 1940 when we had maybe 86 or 7% white, and then it goes down from there.
Right.
And after 1970, that's when we see like the huge decline, and most of that is because of Hispanic, right? The black stayed pretty constant. So if we had just kept it black and white,
that's right,
it would have been sustainable, arguably, but
that's exactly right.
That's not what happened, and we kept getting more Hispanics, and then in the 80s started to get more Asians.
At the same time, it looks like
it's about that's 50. The tech boom right there.
At the same time, it does look like blacks have increased their representation in the total population. So at 1965, they were 11% of the total population, as where in 2015 they're 14% of the total population. So they did have a 3% gain. In the same time, Hispanics had a 4% gain from 4% of the total population in 1965 to 8% in 2015.
I would argue that a lot of that, not the Hispanic growth, but because they're anti-abortion and they have a lot of kids typically, but the Black growth is not due to a huge growth in their population, but more so to a lack of growth in the white population. So they just become a greater share because the white population isn't growing.
I would
because
say
again, it's only 2%, 3%. It's not huge.
Right. I mean, well, there's a couple of factors. The government is importing Somalis,
Sudanese,
right?
and Somalis. Yes.
And they breed at like 6, 7, 8 kids.
Right, but we haven't seen that effect yet. We haven't seen.
I have 20,000 Somalis in the city. In the city of 36,000 white people where I was born. So I've seen the effects of that personally, which is maybe why I'm
in the census and the population counting, in them having, so you're seeing the first generation mainly.
That was only that's only the last 20 years, right? That's
so I'm trying to say.
I would think that the growth of the Black population would be more to do with the introduction of welfare programs. And you're right, the diminishment of the white population ties into that too, because the welfare programs, white people in general are the net payers into those programs, as where Black
we have to
people
pay for other people's kids instead of our own. I agree.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, so valid thought. I guess I could understand some of the things you said, like peanut butter and jazz and stuff that Blacks contributed. What would you say that Asians and Hispanics have contributed other than like taco trucks?
I would argue that if I knew more about computers, that there would probably be a whole litany of things that I could list about Asians. But what Hispanics have contributed, it's essentially the same thing that the European immigrants in the late 1800s contributed, which was a cheap source of labor. So I would agree that it's better to have higher wages and fewer people and all that sort of thing. There is a benefit to having the cheaper labor, and that more things can be more built and more people can have access to it.
The benefit is to the elites, that they can sustain the debt and keep that going, keep the inflation going, and keep devaluing our monetary system. So yeah, it's great. It's great for the corporations and the bankers and everything.
Right, but there is a huge benefit to them, and probably surely an outsized benefit to them. That doesn't mean that there's no benefit to the consumer, right? So yes, there's an outsized benefit to Walmart that they get their plastic stuff from China or whatever. That doesn't mean there's zero benefit to the consumer, that it costs $1 instead of $3, right? So I'm not saying it's a huge benefit or that it outweighs the cost. What I'm saying is that there is benefit.
Oh, good. So you changed your mind. You don't think it outweighs the cost?
In the case of labor, no, I don't.
Wait, I'm confused. I just got lost. Where do we stand now?
He just admitted that in terms of labor, so Hispanic immigration basically coming in here, cheap labor, he doesn't think that the benefits would outweigh the costs.
But
right.
But there's a benefit that does outweigh the cost other than labor. I'm sorry.
I guess that would be the jazz and the peanut butter and the basketball.
But there are cultural icons. Muhammad Ali, Babe Ruth, who was a quarter black, Joe Louis and whatnot.
I'm sorry, I hate laughing. But.
All these sorts of things that make us the popular culture throughout the world.
So that's worth people.
A slightly higher murder rate.
I don't understand.
Well, you're talking about a slightly higher murder rate, most of which, if you take the black on black violence out of the murder rate isn't really higher than any other.
And what about our cities? Like we every time we can't have a white city anymore. It's like they invade these urban areas to get the Gibbs, and then the white flight occurs and it keeps pushing white people out more.
Well, I agree. I don't think that people should be voting for the Gibbs, and then all of a sudden, then you wouldn't have that sort of problem. But I think a lot of the problem is that in cities, people need cheap labor to, do the plumbing and stuff. So they hire people to be a janitor or whatever. And what that does is that allows them to have the flexibility to live in a suburb. So they're able to live in suburbia in a big home, because they have people doing the dirty work who are black or Hispanic or whatever in the city. You couldn't have that sort of expansion that we have in America without that sort of a labor force. And you could see that in Europe, where they don't have a huge, or never really had until a few years ago, a big suburban population. They're all in the cities. So they can stay in the cities, yeah, but then nobody in the upper middle class gets to have, you know, a suburban house in Connecticut kind of thing.
Wait, no. We still would have had people in the cities. We like in the 50s, we had these white cities. If you look at LA, it was all white people. So what are you saying that we wouldn't have had? Like we don't need that much labor.
No. What you wouldn't have had is you wouldn't have had the ability for those people in LA to then buy themselves a 3,000 square foot house 20 miles outside of the city, because now they can own a plumbing company as opposed to being the plumber. Because they can hire out cheap labor and they can say, okay, I own a plumbing company and I can hire a plumber to do all this work. So I only need to come into the city for 3 hours
this is why we have this disparity between the baby boomers and the millennials right now. It's because everything was kind of like handed to the millennial, the boomers, in terms of you know, the labor being cheaper and they could start businesses and everything. And now the ladder has been cut off because the bottom rungs of the ladder, it's all minorities that are filling those. So the white people, they can't get really a leg up. They can't get started.
I agree. Like I said, I think that
so it's thrown the ecosystem out of whack.
Yes, I agree. And that's my whole point about diversity, is that it's all a matter of balance. You know, there used to be a popular 80-20 thought, but people are now going 100% zero. And I think that 80-20 is a better combination, because that way you do get exposure to different views.
Man,
and whatever.
I would love 80-20. Can we just go back to 80-20?
But that's where we were in 1965, and that's where I think that the ideal society.
I'm not saying, Jared. I know you're groaning.
Oh my god, I'm having like.
Well,
I'm not saying that's my ideal. I'm just saying that'd be like, awesome.
Where I live now,
get back to
it's like 90-10, and like even that's too much for me, because when I was growing up, it was like 90. No, seriously, it was like 95-100, and we have a lot of inbound migration now because of federal programs that are paying non-whites to come here, and they come here.
Which is ridiculous.
Which is ridiculous. Not assimilate. They barely learn English. They don't work. It's fucking insane. If you go to Lewiston, Maine, it looks like little Somalia. It's insane. And
I agree.
An 80-20 split to me seems like it would be even worse. I hear that and I freak the fuck out. I'm like, no, what? Because
why is that worse?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
worse than 50-50.
It's less. It's still 90% white where I am, and people voluntarily choose to be here, whether they admit it or not, because they self-segregate by race. And there's other states that are like that too, like New Hampshire, like Utah, right? And I don't go with the standards for the rest of the country, like living in Nevada or California or Florida, or really any southern state. They have a mix that is not something you would see in a lot of northern states, and it's not something that I would want forced on me. I would feel like I was being invaded if I had a 20-80 split.
Right, but but a 20-80 split, because you're going to have these minority groups seeking lower end wages in cities, a 20-80 split in the country means that essentially everywhere that's not a city doesn't have anybody who's not white.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right about
the
that.
20%.
The only
80% of that 20 is going to be eaten up by cities.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. Because even anecdotally in Maine, the only places that get these people are cities. If you go 20 miles outside the city, you don't find any of them at all.
Well, and Jared, keep in mind,
would be for the labor force that would be sort of an undercutting labor force, yes, but it's still productive. It still adds to the productivity. Gives you some of that.
No, none of the males work. Almost none of the males work. Some of them do.
No. Clearly, you have to select for the people who are going to be working, and you can't be giving out the gives. But if you took away the gives and you had Hispanics, for example, they're plenty happy to work. You know what I'm saying? It's not the same as like an African who's told he's going to get $2,500 a month. It's like a Mexican who's told you better send back $1,200 a month back to Mexico because you've got a family of 12. You know what I'm saying? So like they're much harder working people.
I mean, if I could choose between the two, I guess I would still choose Mexicans over Somalis. But I mean, I would personally prefer neither.
Right, but you live in
your
Maine,
point's
so
well
you wouldn't have
taken.
to worry about it. You know what I'm saying? You know.
For now, I don't, but someday I might.
If it were 80-20, you wouldn't have to.
So
Because it was 80-20. It was 80-20 and 65, and you didn't have to.
Well,
Or
it was
80, you know,
1585.
okay, we're close, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
but
There we go.
Jared,
not in Maine though. Not in Maine.
No,
Jared.
no, but I'm saying 80-20 for the country doesn't mean 80-20 for Maine.
No, by the time the country gets 60-40 now, which is about what it's at, you know, 65.
It's probably closer to 50-50, I'd say.
You think realistic? Yeah, that's even more
because there's non-reporting and there's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah.
And white people are dying fast.
What are you gonna say, Matt? Sorry to run over you, buddy.
Right.
Yeah, I can't get a word in here.
Yeah, God.
I was just gonna remind Jared that when we were debating, I think Valid Thought brought up that he doesn't mind changing voting rights to be racially based. So if it was 80-20, the 20% wouldn't get to vote.
Well, my position on the voting rights, and I think it was the end of the 3 hours, so I was a little bit unclear about it. But my position on the voting rights should be is that the founders had it right from the beginning. In that, right? Yeah, in that individuals don't have the right to vote. It's the landowners who have the right to vote, and then individuals are counted for how much representation that the landowner is going to get in the electoral college.
I would even go a step further than that. Well, I think that that definitely is more preferable than what we have now. I agree.
And then on top of it, on the counting, you had minorities counted as 3/5 of a person.
Yeah, I don't even think we should do that. And I think we should take it a step further. I think the landowning thing is a good requirement, but why not take it a step further and say only net contributors to the tax system get suffrage? Say if you're taking more in welfare than you're paying in taxes, then you don't get to vote.
Because I think that's a very difficult thing to bridge as far as, okay, well, I'm driving on this road.
Going back is going to be... Going back to the way things were before is going to be difficult too, but since we're dreaming, we might as well dream.
Right. Yeah. No, what I'm saying is it's a hard thing to figure out whether or not you're a net contributor or not, because not all of what you're getting from the government is just a check.
I know.
Right? So
it's not that point.
So somebody,
on me, sure.
Right. So somebody might live, on a hill where they built like some ridiculous mansion, and the government, because who knows, guy pulled some strings or whatever, put up a road.
They build a road out to, yeah. I mean, that's something I constantly bring up when people say that the free movement of illegals has no associated cost. What do you mean? What about all the roads they travel on? What about all the public infrastructure they're using? Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's not just a matter of receiving a welfare check. You're right. Access to all of these different services and resources.
Yeah. So I think that's just a difficult thing to do. So you could keep it to landowners and then, population, and that way people also have an ease of entry in that and an inspiration to enter as well, because then if you buy a house you become a voter, right? So then that becomes an extra incentive to become a landowner and be more responsible.
No, I don't disagree with you.
So yeah, but then again, counting the people, giving it to the electoral college, that makes more sense. And as always, I never say that I'm smarter than Thomas Jefferson. And, these guys were a bunch of smart people who did this stuff for years, and they came up with this system. They probably knew what they were talking about. They certainly knew the dangers of democracy from the Greeks.
I have like a sensitive amygdala response, and because I deal with like the Somali invasion, I hear people kind of like counter signaling my perspective on it anyway. And I experience that as like, holy shit, these people want to force these Somalis on me. So I apologize if I come across like that toward you, but I keep getting surprised by you because it seems like there's not much breathing room between where you are and where maybe someone like Richard Spencer is, right? I mean, it seems like a lot of what you're proposing is something that would be commonplace on the alt-right. I mean, it makes sense. Suffrage for landowners. I mean, how do you feel about getting rid of birthright citizenship?
That's difficult. Because now you're starting to put people into classes, so like if I had a kid, you'd say, well, he's got birthright citizenship because you're 4 generations deep or whatever. But then if a Mexican guy has a kid, you're like, oh, well, you were naturalized. I think that if you've been naturalized and have become a citizen, then birthright citizenship is fine. But if you're an illegal and you're performing an illegal act by having that child, then no, certainly not. That the child is not a citizen.
So you would be,
in my mind,
I also of rolling it back in its current form at least. I mean, right now you can just fucking, you could.
Yeah, no, you can hop the border and pop it out. No, I know. You can shoot it over the border.
Yeah.
But the point is, in our current system, you don't even have to. You can just have the kid in Mexico and cross the border when the kid's 2 years old anyway, and say, hey, he's a DACA kid, he's a dreamer. Yep. My kid's got dreams. So it doesn't even matter. You know, you're talking about, like, we're talking about the minutia of what we can do.
Well, I was just curious. It matters. It matters. I mean, I was just wondering where you came down on it. So it sounds like you would likewise. You're not much of a fan of DACA then either.
No, absolutely not. No, build a wall, deport them all. 100%.
Yeah, I never would have. See, I never would have guessed that. Just arguing with you about this stuff.
No, 100%. 100%. All I'm saying is that there are benefits to a diverse society, and we have enjoyed those benefits, and that we shouldn't just look past all of it in our fight to be pure or whatever, because the most pure societies aren't necessarily the most successful. I mean, they may be peaceful and nice and stuff, but they don't necessarily break the mold and change the world. I think that the ancient Greeks were diverse. I think that the ancient Egyptians were diverse. The ancient Romans, the UK, all these people, they all brought in from different cultures and societies. Now, their downfall in almost all circumstances was when they got too diverse and they lost the true sense of who they are. And that's where I think we've been. Exactly.
Tower of Babel type situation, yeah.
That's where I think we've been since about 1965, and that's why we're in our decline. Right, but I don't think it's just.
How do you propose that we hold that in? If we don't say from the beginning, okay, we're going to set this up as a white country and it shouldn't change. How are you going to say, well, where are you going to draw the line? Oh, 20%'s okay. Well, there's going to be people who are pushing for 30%, and at 30%, there's going to be people pushing for 40%.
You just don't. If you don't have immigration. Straight up, just don't have immigration. Protect your borders.
I can't find anything.
Right, and you allow for your abortion, and you don't have government assistance programs.
And you have forced sterilization programs. Yeah, just put the birth control. How come we can't do what Israel does?
We found out that we don't need forced sterilization if we just provide.
But Israel does it.
Provide free, cheap abortions in poor communities. They do it themselves.
I think providing them with free birth control would be even cheaper than providing them with abortions, because then they never get pregnant.
We already do both.
So
when the right wing fights against abortion, I'm like, what are you doing?
I'm just trying to make it. I'm against abortion. I am against abortion, but I don't want to get into it right now. But all I'm saying is
another situation where I feel it's morally wrong, but I don't care because I prefer the result.
Okay, then that's something I can live with. But I think what Israel's doing is morally wrong, right? By forcing people to have like chemical sterilization, but at the same time, I don't give a fuck. I think that if it's good enough for them to do with our tax dollars, it should be good enough for us to do. So if you want welfare, then yeah, the food that you're going to be able to get with your food stamps is going to make you infertile. Why not that? I think that.
No, I just say you want welfare. That's nice, but you're not getting it. Go fuck yourself.
I'm down with that too.
Yeah, that's and I think honestly, like, you put people, when people are told that they don't have that support system, they simply can't have the kids. They can't support the kids. They just can't. And if they starve, they starve, and if they die, they die. And I'm strongly against public schooling, right? I don't think public schooling should exist at all. I think it should be private, right? So if that's the case, and you do have a requirement, which I do think there should be a state requirement that your kids have some sort of basic education, then it becomes more and more costly to have kids. Fewer people have kids. They have more abortions, et cetera, especially at the lower end, which tends to be minorities. And then it keeps your population, your 80-20 stable, without having to do any kind of sterilization.
Totally agree. Valid thought. I really like this strategy you've got, because you can go to the liberal, and say, yeah, I like diversity. I love this stuff. But you know what? We're going to have these funded abortions, we're going to have, or
We
not.
do. They want that.
Well, that's true. They want that.
Welcome.
But we're going to have to take away voting rights from anyone who's not a landowner. We're going to have to.
We're not taking them away. We're resetting the foundation of this country, and we're putting it back. In the hands of the founders.
And no immigration. We're going to stop immigration.
We don't need people. We don't need more people. We have plenty of people.
Right.
We have a diverse population already. Plenty of people. Who needs more people?
And
China doesn't.
What was the other one you said that would trigger the liberal? I forget. Anyway.
I didn't say forced sterilization.
Forced sterilization. There you go.
Me. That was Jared. That was
me. I'm more in favor of forced sterilization than abortions. I mean, especially since Planned Parenthood, what do they get? Like fucking $500 million a year, and they're the biggest contributors to the DNC. Let's stop using taxpayer money to fund.
Yeah, I can get behind that. Like if
you want to continue your 80-20 state, you're going to need that, because if abortions become more expensive. Right. Let's say an abortion, instead of being $500, was like $5,000. Right. Then guess who's not getting it?
Yeah, I know. The point's not lost on me. And the point's also not lost on me that the vast majority of Americans who get abortions aren't white. You know what I mean? So even though I wouldn't accept them as Americans personally, as we know. But yeah, right. But then there's a case to be made that, you know, I forget the actual numbers are, but it's like Planned Parenthood operates internationally. 20% of the people that get abortions through Planned Parenthood,
mainly in Africa,
are white, but 9% of the world population is white. But so I think the case can still be made that Planned Parenthood's abortions are diminishing the white population globally relative to the non-white population.
Maybe globally, but we're talking about, hopefully we're talking about localized United States. If you were to try to maintain your 80-20,
I'll concede that point. You're not wrong about
the one thing. In the 1880s to the 1910s, the eugenicists had a long debate about these things, and Margaret Sanger was, lauded for this solution. And it was a way to stop doing forced sterilizations, which made people very upset and didn't create a lot of, social cohesion, right? And do it in a different way that's more humane, but still
what's
gets
crazy
the same
is like
effect.
We don't really have a demand for this among white people because we only produce 2 or 3 kids per family. The only reason that they have this is because
the demand is to keep the black population low. That's the demand.
Right.
So that is a demand among the white.
I would rather sterilize and deport them. Sterilize and deport them.
Okay, I don't know what you think, Jared, but the one thing I'm not so sure I'm willing to compromise on is letting Jews into the country, because they can do a lot of damage. No matter what system you've got, like they can start subverting from any position, and they can start eroding any progress you've made.
Yep.
So that's kind of a deal breaker for me.
No, you can't. You absolutely cannot admit Jews into your country. If you want your country to survive, if you want your government to not be subverted and turn toward the opposite of its intended purpose, then you cannot have Jews in your country.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I would say that what's important is that you have the sorts of laws that we had in place in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I forget what they're called. Those the laws in Hollywood what were those laws called? The Hollywood laws, where they couldn't do like TV stuff, they couldn't do anything salacious, blah 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 blah. A lot of that was to stop the influence of sort of this hedonistic stuff.
It was around the McCarthy era. I don't know. I don't know what they called it though.
But those laws were around for a while.
Like anti-smut kind of laws, like
yeah,
okay,
yeah, exactly. And you can do that sort of thing, and then you can still get because I don't think there's any denying the creativity of the Jews. I mean,
I do this a lot.
People.
I do this a lot in interrupting, but you just gave me a great idea. One thing in that vein that we could do is just ban circumcision. Like
they tried to do that in Iceland, right?
Yeah.
Good for them.
Same exact thing.
Here's what I think we should do, and I think this solves several problems. I think it solves a lot of the immigration problem, and I think it solves much of the Jewish problem as well. I don't think that somebody should be allowed to hold citizenship in the United States and any other country.
Yeah, no, I think that would solve a lot of problems too, because then you don't have all these dual Israeli citizens coming over here, getting American citizenship and voting in our elections.
That's right. And you would have a lot of Jews who would decide that they wanted to go to Israel.
Right.
You would probably have a lot of Mexicans who decided that they wanted to go back to Mexico as well.
I don't know,
man. But maybe not as many, but still.
I just don't trust it. Like, you know, like there's that one uncircumcised Jew who is willing to give up his citizenship, and he gets in there, that rabbi, and then he's, oh no,
he's doing Jewish tekiah, lying about his dick to get over the border.
They call it.
I swear to God, I don't got a turtle helmet. Let me in, please.
It'll be called a penis yarmulke. But I do think that the Jews, you know, being a high IQ population, they do add some creativity and a lot of discovery, and do have a benefit. It's just that people need to be wary and aware and of the things that are bad against it. It's just like blacks, right? Blacks have positive aspects to them, but people should be aware of the certain traits that are not so positive. Just like the Jews, they have positive aspects, but people should be aware of the traits that are not positive.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could just collaborate with all these people. We could collaborate with all these people from a distance, from the safety of our own countries, over this wonderful thing we have called the internet.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
Again, this is the fallacy of like we can just experience the world by saying.
No, wait. I'm gonna. You said that we didn't need public schools because you know technology has kind of made it so we. Well, you didn't make the technological case.
No. It's a government case.
The government case. We don't need public schools, so I mean, you know, why do we need to have physical proximity to transmit culture if we don't need physical proximity to transmit knowledge?
What I'm saying is that a lot of the discoveries that have come out of the United States wouldn't have come without such a mixture of people, because your brain, your mind is opened up by different.
But now we have the internet, and your mind can be just as open on the internet. You don't have to have actual physical proximity. I mean, I don't guarantee that we're never.
You could have said this, right? Sure, but you could have said this in 1870 or 1860 or whatever when the Italians came up with a radio. They said, "Oh, we have the radio, so we don't have to do it anymore. Oh, we have TV, we have the telegraph, we have the telephone." It's just another means of communication. That doesn't diminish.
But the question is, why, if knowledge can be transmitted without physical proximity to a school, why couldn't culture be transmitted through the internet without physical proximity? I understand that it wasn't transmitted that way in the past before the internet, but now that we have the internet, I would almost make the argument that culture is transmitted more through the internet than it is in everyday life, because you get this atomization that comes, like, you look at the Putnam studies, right? Bowling alone, where the more diversity you have in a society, the less social trust there is even between people of the same race. So I think the case could be made that culture isn't even transmitted in once you get to a certain point of diversity in your society, and that it's better transmitted through the internet. I've picked up a ton of culture, most of it from other white people, over the internet that I was never exposed to in my almost entirely 100% ethnically homogenous home state of Maine, right?
Sure, but that becomes the internet as its own thing, right? That becomes the internet culture, not American culture, not British
internet cultures. There's multiple internet.
But it becomes like the culture of an individual who is on the internet. It doesn't become American culture. Right?
Not necessarily. I mean, there's alt-right culture on the internet. There's 4chan culture on the internet. It's not necessarily individualized. There's still there's a collective group identity to these things that's not necessarily based around nations, but
it's not based around nations. That's my point.
It still enriches the quality of content. It still provides a culture in a sense that was not there before. It's still there's still artifacts of that culture, like music and art and language, even slang, right? Even food. Sure. I mean, that stuff all comes out of that.
Right, but that doesn't mean we can just throw away all the other cultures, right? So like actual culture,
like throwing away. We don't necessarily have to throw anything away to live separately from each other.
Well, no, but if you're on the internet, you're already living separately from each other. You're in your house.
That's the beauty of it.
Right, but you're in your house, so what are you worried about? So
the 20,000 Somalis 10 miles down the road.
20,000 Somalis. You live in a very extreme example. You live in
I know.
You live in an Obama dump zone. Okay.
No,
it's an Obama dump zone.
No, it's not. That's the other thing we talked about on the last debate too. Is this started under George W. Bush? He was the one who brought these fucking people in here.
What baffles me is that, and what just amazes me is that before 9/11 we had 1.3 million Muslims, and now we have 5 million Muslims. That is just amazing.
Black pill. That's worse
It's
than
just
that's
amazing.
worse than the Hispanic situation. That's a higher rate of growth, I would almost have to assume.
Rate of growth, yeah, tripling in 10 years,
Yeah.
15 years. That's insane.
That's not good. If it triples every 15 years, I was just doing the math for Maine. So we started out with like 2,000 in the year 2003,
Right.
2004, something like that. Then it doubled to 5,000, doubled
Right.
to 10,000, went up to 15,000 at some point. Then they stopped reporting the numbers because I think they thought people would get scared, and rightfully so, they would. So, you know, in another 20 years, if we have 60,000, 70, 80,000 Somalis, 20 years from then, they multiply again.
You'll have moved. You won't be there.
That's
I just
true,
found
right?
a good article from CNN. Somalis finding their place in Minnesota.
Of course.
I look at the day-to-day
It's so
lives of people in Minnesota's Somali community, the largest in the United States.
I think I read
This
that
is
from
why
a
we need.
podcast.
This is why we need global warming, so that we can move Africans to Minnesota, and they'll be fine. That's why global warming's a good thing. You see, there's benefits to everything. I would say that a lot of the problems we could solve with a practical solution, because I try to find practical solutions to a lot of these things, is that we could push to get rid of all tax deductions on charities to foreign countries, and then we can increase the tax deduction for domestic charities. And in doing so, you would stop helping for like aid for Africa. And so you wouldn't continue to make their population skyrocket, and you would help, the homeland. Because I think that when Oprah gives $20 million to Africa and then gets to write $7 million off of her federal taxes, it's like, you didn't give that $7 million to the country. You gave it to some other country. Why do you get to escape federal taxation because you gave to some other country? That's ridiculous.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah. No, I think that's a good idea. I think it would create the incentives that you need, right? So if you create powerful disincentives for foreign charities and strong incentives to donate to domestic charities, you'd stop seeing the population explosion that we're currently seeing in the third world. And what we see white people go from 30% of the world's population to 5%, or I'm sorry, 8.5% of the world's population. It's not because white people are breeding themselves out of existence. It's because the birth rates of Africans have been highly subsidized at the expense of white people. What you're proposing, I think, would go a long way toward undoing a lot of that damage.
Yeah, I really don't understand why people get to, and just on principle, I don't know why somebody should be able to deduct off their federal taxes when they give their money to other countries. That's just insane. It's just insane. You've not fulfilled your obligation to the country.
Generally speaking, I'm against taxation just because.
Well, sure, but
it's that I'd like to be able to provide the fees voluntarily, but within the context of what we're talking about in the federal government and how it operates, you should not be exempted from paying for the services that you use just because you donated to a foreign country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that would be a very good way to quell a lot of the immigration problems, and also if you weren't in second grade, which I'm sure everybody did this in second grade, they were like, oh, give $1 a day to some kid in Somalia, and he'll be your pen pal or whatever. We had to do that.
I did that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and they do that all over the place, and it's like, well, if they weren't doing that, and if it were give $1 a day to a kid in Detroit or whatever, you might be more nationalistically inclined, as opposed to just always thinking about the kid in Africa who wrote you with a crayon one time when you were 5. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, it's a good idea, and it's not something people talk about a lot. Just when a lot of people talk about these, like the demographic issues, they speak of it as though it's occurring naturally in a vacuum without any government manipulation at all. And they say, what's the problem, white people? You're not competent enough to beat all these people in the market. You're not competent enough to reproduce more than them. And it's like, no, there's a bunch of disincentives that are set up to subsidize the birth rates of the third world at the expense of the birth rates of the first world. And
white people aren't competent to individually take on entire groups of non-whites. That's what it really comes down to. And so we're not allowed to organize, which means that, yeah, we are going to lose if individually whites are going up against groups of others.
Well, and that's why we can't let people hold collectivism over our heads as though it's something that we have to avoid in order to be morally pure, right? Because they're only doing that to make it so that we don't divide labor as individuals, because they know as soon as we do, we're more effective than we are alone. They need to keep us atomized, and they need to keep us as individuals, and they need to make us think that no other white people are thinking about these things so that they can just, you know, cruise control, coast all the way to 2045 or 2065 or whatever it ends up being with no resistance at all. They literally think they're going to win this with no resistance.
Well, that becomes the question, is like, what's the end game? I mean, what's the end game for these people? Because they must know at the end of the day that though they may become for last, they will become for, right? I mean, there's nobody in South Africa that's safe, really, right? At the end of the day, you all end up in a camp. So what's the end game? I mean,
I think some of them just aren't smart enough to realize that.
No, and a lot of the time,
I mean, we're talking about the high up people in control of government with,
okay.
and tens of millions of dollars. The people at the top of the hill, right? Who actually benefit from the cheap labor and blah 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 blah, and for the social unrest. Those people, the George Soroses and stuff. What's the end game? What's the win? I don't
create
get it.
a permanent underclass of non-white serfs over whom Jews can rule in perpetuity forever.
Right, but do they really think that those non-whites aren't going to kill them? Because they're wrong.
But they got the technology, Goy. They can survive forever.
Yeah, but when you're
drone striking them from a distance,
who's going to run?
When your whole army is Black and Hispanic people. What are you doing?
Yeah, remember, Jews don't like to do manual labor, so they're going to need somebody.
Filthy Goyim! How dare you make me work? That's what Goyim are for.
Well, I can understand that they may want the labor, but you're going to need people to fight, right?
No,
Jews also don't want to fight either. And it's like, well, if you don't have the white people to fight for you, then you're going to be telling Black people to go kill those Black people. Like, I don't think that's going to work out.
I think you may have a point there, but there's something else to take into consideration too, is that what happens in these countries once the white people are driven out and no longer have any role in producing, people turn to cannibalism. So I think it's kind of like Matt says. I mean, to some degree, I don't think that most people have this thought out, and what it will result in South Africa, like it has in Zimbabwe or Haiti, is it will result in cannibalism. It would happen in the United States too, if God forbid it ever got that bad.
And also,
here.
like the higher ups, they're just not thinking long term. They're thinking about the short term. What's in it for them in the short term, and they don't care about their children if they even have children. They probably don't. But.
You're right. It's very high time preference decisions.
But you can't argue about, like, a massive long term global conspiracy if you're then going to say, oh well, they're only talking short term. You know what I'm saying? Because
it's not that they
must have a long term.
It's not that they're only talking short term. It's that, like everybody else, the way that government interventions work, it distorts time preference schedules. So they're more present oriented than I think they otherwise would do. They're probably more focused on the present than they are in the future. They probably have long-term goals, but I would assume that their short-term desperation to maintain their political power might obfuscate some of their, it might make it hard for them to see what the long-term effect's going to be, even if they think that if they think everything's going to work out fine for them at the end, that these non-white hordes over which they rule aren't going to rebel against them.
Well, I would say to answer that question, I think that in the past these guys had more long term, like the people who said the Rockefellers. We're gonna go through the institutions, the long march through the institutions.
Yeah.
I think those people
it was a 100-year thing.
Had low time preference, but now I'm not so sure. I think, and that's I think that's why you see. A lot of the leftists are, they're getting ahead of themselves, right?
Yep.
They think that they've won, and so they think that the white race is beaten. So they just they start clamping down on Twitter and everything, and they're starting to realize maybe that's not the case. And I think that's because they have the higher time preference.
No, you're right. They did that march through the institutions thing, which started like 100 years ago. But I guess at the same time, we've had 100 years of fractional reserve central banking too, and every intervention that the Federal Reserve makes millions of times a day is going to shift society's time preference schedule forward. It is going to make people more high time preference. So these guys may have started out thinking, we got a 100-year plan to take over all these institutions, but the time they're done with it, by the time they've got all this central bank apparatus up and the time they've interfered with everybody's private property, their own time preference schedules have shifted such that they're almost entirely present oriented now and not thinking about the future at all, which that's kind of fucking terrifying, man, that they're just going to get us into a situation like this and just be like, good luck, have fun. But I don't know. I kind of wish.
So basically what you're saying is that the people like the Vanderbilts came up with this crazy idea, and then like Hillary Clinton's just doing it to win the election. She doesn't even know what's going on.
Well, there's that, but there's also the fact that the Vanderbilts who built up all this wealth aren't the same Vanderbilts who inherited it and then, continued on.
Anderson Cooper.
What's that? Is he one of them?
Yeah, he is a Vanderbilt. Yeah,
but he doesn't produce anything of value. He's just,
but he furthers the agenda.
Sure. My only point is
that's valuable to them.
He's probably not as competent as his forebears were, and that's all I'm saying.
For sure, yeah.
His time preference schedule is probably a lot shorter than his forebears. Especially, isn't Anderson Cooper gay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he doesn't have kids. His time preference schedule does not extend beyond the scope of his own life. He's like Keynes in that he's in the end we're all dead. He doesn't care about leaving a better world than he inherited because we're all dead. Fuck it. The world ends when I die. So fuck everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Okay. So all right. So it becomes telescoping as you become closer to the reality, which makes sense.
Yeah, I think
you don't need 100. You don't need a 100-year scheme now, when it's already been gone for 100 years. You only need a 10-year scheme or something.
That, and they can't even plan 100 years in the future now. There's so much regime uncertainty and economic uncertainty that you can't even plan 10 years in the future. It kind of sucks.
Well, couldn't you have said the same thing 100 years ago with all the fascism versus democracy versus communism that was going on in Europe? In the 1910s through the 1950s?
Maybe, but 100 years ago, we were getting business cycles once every 100 years. Now we're getting them once every 7 or 8, right? So it's 100 years. If I just dealt with a bus cycle from a previous business cycle, and I know the next one's not coming for another 100 years, that's a long time to go. I could, build a house, fucking start a family, have a career.
That's also speed of commerce too, right? And the bus back then were much more. Had much more of an impact than they do now.
Not necessarily. I don't think so.
Well, like when the Great Depression hit, like that started making 25% of people out of work right away, and people were like eating dirt like right away.
Sure. Yeah. That doesn't mean that
didn't have that sort of situation.
It didn't force people to be eating dirt or whatever, but there were technological advances between the Great Depression and now, which allowed them to have food stamp cards, and food production in general is a lot better since then. But I think it could be argued that we're still dealing with the fallout of 2008, and that we've seen a lot of stagflation and stagnating wages in most of the major manual labor industries. I think the case could be made that we haven't really recovered from that, and we're not going to until interest rates normalize again, right? So
no, I agree with that. But what I'm saying is that I think that simply the speed of commerce and the growth of the economy over the past 100 years is what makes boom and bust cycles come more rapidly now.
I see what you're saying. I don't think it's necessarily the speed of commerce. I think it's the fact that the Federal Reserve is printing more money than it was before. So, like, if that's what you want to call it, the speed of commerce, but they're lowering the cost of borrowing money to artificially stimulate production and consumption in the present, which causes more fake growth for which there is no organic demand, and that creates business cycles once every decade instead of once every century. I don't know that we necessarily have any legitimate growth, but
no, I agree with you on the Federal Reserve printing money. And that's obviously a huge contributor to our problems, if not the main contributor to our problems, that are debt issues. But what I'm trying to say is that because the economy is bigger and more diverse and moves faster, simply from that, forget the Fed and whatever, forget all that stuff. But because there are more aspects of the economy, because there are bigger industries now than there were 100 years ago.
I don't know if that's true, though.
Well, for example, internet, right? Or NASDAQ didn't even exist 100 years ago.
But the steel industry still existed 100 years ago. The iron industry still existed 100 years ago. There was still there was an international reserve currency 100 years ago that was based on gold. So I don't know that it's necessarily that the economy moves faster. I think what you're describing as faster movement in the economy is really just the Federal Reserve. Like I said, it's fiat inflation. It's not necessarily growth, is what I'm saying. It's just
and we used to. Like we used to have, I think we used to have more frequent dips or recessions or whatever, but then it just bounced back right away because the economy could handle it. It was anti-fragile, if you will. And now everything is based on the stock market, which people are forced into.
Yeah, if they were to allow interest rates to normalize right now, the government wouldn't be able to pay its debt, and then every company holding government bonds would be out of business. And there's
I think they might be headed towards that. Did you guys see the Chinese-Russia oil agreement?
They've been talking about dumping the petrodollar since I think about 2011.
They just did it last week. They did their first trade. You can look it up. Oil and Russia is backing the oil purchases with gold.
Nice.
Yeah, and it's a group of China, Russia, and then there's 5 or 6 other countries who are already in that trade group, and they're going to trade money on the yuan. Back it with gold.
I got a stub here from RT, very short. It says, China is the world's biggest crude consumer and buys most of its oil from Russia. However, most settlements are still in US dollars. The launch of the Petro Yuan now allows Moscow and Beijing to use national currencies instead. China and Russia are actively reducing dependence on the dollar in bilateral trade. In October 2017, Beijing launched a payment system for transactions in yuan and Russian rubles. This means that settlements for Russian oil deliveries to China, which have reached 60 million tons per year, can be done without using the dollar. Yeah, you're right. So there you go.
And so what that means is that I think it's 12 or 14 trillion that we've printed in the past 10 years or so.
It's all coming back.
It's all going to come back. There's going to be massive inflation, and you're going to need a wheelbarrow to get a slice of bread.
Especially since they cut taxes. That's one thing that people don't talk about is what what the tax rate was actually doing is removing monetary inflation so that it didn't result in price inflation. So if we had this petrodollar situation at the exact same time as we have tax cuts, and then maybe even more tax cuts in the future, not that I'm necessarily complaining about bringing home more money in my paycheck. I'm definitely not, but you're right. It's going to cause a situation. We are going to see increased price inflation.
Massive. You talk about $14 trillion. There's only $9 trillion of gold ever mined in the world.
It's gonna Ron Paul's gonna be right. Ron Paul's gonna be right. What they're gonna do is they're gonna come out and they're gonna say we need to devalue 50s and 100s and take them out of circulation because drug dealers are just so bad. But really, they're doing it to get all those 50s and 100s out of the economy. And then they're gonna come out and say we're gonna ban cash altogether because cash can be used for drugs, and that's just so bad because they need that cash ban because they're going to want to enforce negative interest rates.
Well, the other argument is that we could use the dispute with North Korea to start a war with China, or at least proxy wars, and then drive the economy that way. And I think that that's just as, if not more likely.
Refinance the debt and then continue to borrow and then just defer payment even longer. Kick the can down the road, if you will. Yeah,
that's right. And disrupt them through war, disrupt enough of their trade routes where they have to go back to using the petrodollar. I think we've seen many more examples of that, like Libya and Syria and toppling these regimes, Iran. We've seen a lot more examples than that of that than just, hey, let's recall our own currency and blah, 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 blah. What you're talking about, it's much more. I think it's much more likely that we have a proxy war with China and Russia.
Depends on the country, right? If you look at a country like Venezuela, that's what they did is they devalued the 50s. And then the 100 note. And then after they did that, they had to print, I think, 100,000 notes and million notes.
They went broke the next day. Like, it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. It's basically like, oh, we're going to take everybody's money and turn it digital and then there's going to be a blackout.
The presidential race in Venezuela now is centered on Maduro trying to get reelected by promising to take 3 zeros off the end of the currency. Right. And his competitors like, that's not going to fucking fix anything. Let's just use American dollars, which that's not a perfect solution, but it'd be a hell of a lot better than continuing to print fucking bolivars from nothing forever, because that's certainly not helping them at all.
Right. But I think in the country, I think in the case of the petrodollar and protecting the petrodollar, especially from China and Russia, it's going to take a lot more than some economic manipulation of the U.S. like we did in Argentina. Like we just sort of, well, yeah, exactly. Or even what we did in Libya. It's going to require, going to war again with places like Iran and Afghanistan and North Korea.
And we can't do that without going to war with Russia. If you go into war with Iran, you're getting into a war with Russia.
Well, but it's a matter of, will they fight it in the open field, or will it be fought like Vietnam was fought, sort of in this in-between country? Exactly.
Yep.
And I think there's a much greater, because that way they can avoid nukes, but they can still prop up their economies by going into war production.
It's fucking scary shit. And some you almost have to kind of hope, that Trump will do the right thing. He talked a big game during his campaign where he's, the economy's in a big fat bubble. And then he had a speech, I think last February, maybe, whatever his speech in Poland was, where he's talking, there's no such thing as a global currency. One of his comments. If he stuck to that,
Poland was about a week before they fired Steve Bannon.
Yeah,
that was about it for me.
Yeah,
I started my channel the day they fired Steve Bannon. I said the whole thing was, this is the end of the Trump revolution.
Yeah, that's what I felt like too.
Yeah,
but if he stuck to those comments, there's no such thing as a global currency, and American foreign policy revolved around that sentiment, and would be a lot better off.
Right, but the problem is that we've now made ourselves the global currency. And now we fall prey to all the problems of that.
Yeah.
So, unless people want to come up with like an alternative American currency, which I think could be interesting. We could have a domestic and a foreign currency, right? Maybe American dollars would be blue or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean,
that might be a way to do it. So you could still retain the value of your global currency, but you could create a separate domestic value for your. I don't know if that could be done, but
they're just going to try to manipulate that too, though.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah, but I mean, you've got Bitcoin. Bitcoin is essentially that, right? I mean, it's not American, it's global, but it's a separate currency within other forms of currency.
Yeah. I mean, crypto kind of serves that purpose, but I think
there's no backing, which is the inherent weakness of crypto.
Well, the
backed by gold, silver, platinum.
The reason why you would want backing with gold or silver or platinum is just for the scarcity of it. And with Bitcoin, it's scarce because there's a hard number of Bitcoins that can be mined. So you don't necessarily need to have it be back. That's not the important part.
Right, but it's the historic value of gold, and that the historic value of gold dates back for all of time.
Oh, I mean, that's Mises's.
Bitcoin is trying to say we're inherently valuable as of today.
That's Mises's regression theorem, right? That gold is valuable as money today because it was valuable as money yesterday, all the way back until the point that it emerged out of the barter economy. So the historical value, yes, there's no such thing as intrinsic value, right? It's all historical and what people expect to be able to get in exchange for it in the future. It's all psychological in that sense, right?
When we were on the gold standard and we would give countries an ounce of gold for $35, right? They could turn it in and they could get an actual ounce of gold from the Federal Reserve.
I know,
for every $35.
But
so said it. I mean, yeah, it's random, but I mean,
even that, I think it could be argued is privy to some of the same vulnerabilities that a fiat money system could be, because the government could just change the reserve requirements. So prior to the government issuing money, prior to the government having a monopoly on the circulation of credit, what would happen is that you'd have gold warehousers where, I don't want to physically hold my gold because it's too cumbersome. It's fucking heavy, right? You take it to a gold warehouser. The gold warehouser gives you a receipt for your gold, and then people start trading the receipts because they know that they can trade the receipts.
Right, sure.
For gold. And I think a system like that would probably be even better than
that's what the US dollar used to be.
No, the US dollar wasn't like that. The US dollar was similar to that, except the gold where the government had a monopoly on gold warehousing. So they were the only ones that could issue certificates, warehouse receipts for the gold.
Okay.
So what that does is there's no competitive pressure of other banks. So they just continue to create more receipts for which there is no gold until eventually there's a run. There's a run on the banks and they have the gold call. In a free market situation, if there's more than one gold warehouse, or say one of them starts inflating the supply of their receipts relative to the gold, all of those receipts go out into the economy, go into other banks, and those banks bring them back to that guy and say, hey, give me your gold. And eventually that bank goes out of business.
Then you've got 1,000 different types of receipts or currency. You know, you've got a gold warehouse.
As long as the receipt, as long as the banknote has the bank of origin on it, it shouldn't matter.
Well, it kind of does, because then you have to be converting all the time.
Not really. It's you have a receipt for an ounce of gold. You can say, you know, I'm willing to part with a coffee cup for this receipt. Now, not that a coffee cup would be worth an ounce of gold, but you don't necessarily always need to be converting. And even if you did, it's not like they couldn't create a smartphone app for that. I have something that does that for cryptocurrency.
We got an app for that. So every time you go into a store, like you might be sitting there and just what's in your wallet, you could have 5 different modes of currency.
Well, no, I mean, there's even if you look at modern applications of this, right? You can get a gold card right now from multiple providers. I think Peter Schiff does one where it's accepted anywhere there's a debit card, and the warehouser will just sell a little bit of your gold for you every time you use the card.
Hey, you should be getting paid to shill for.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend going through his company.
This is the Fox News ad, right?
As an example of something I'm aware of. So I understand the arguments that gold can be cumbersome, and that's why it fell out of a popular use in the first place. But there's other ways to get around that. I think crypto even is a great way to get around. I mean, like I said, the reason why people use gold is because of its physical scarcity, but you achieve the same thing with crypto because, you know, there's only a certain number of Bitcoin that will ever be mined, or a certain number of Ethereum will ever be mined. I'm not sure if Ethereum's the same way, but you get my point, right? The fact that there's scarcity there, no storage fees with the Bitcoin either, allows people to use it as money the same way that they would have been able to use gold as money. And it's why the governments of the world, like China and the United States, want to crack down on crypto, because they themselves would like to maintain a global monopoly on the circulation of currency, right?
Right. No, I agree. I applaud things like Bitcoin. I think that their scarcity is sort of fabricated, right? I don't think that scarcity doesn't necessarily determine value. It does in most circumstances.
Well, supply and demand, right? I mean, it's the scarcity.
Well, right, but there has to be the demand. There has to be the demand.
Right.
Right. So you can have something that's super scarce, but nobody wants it. So whatever. And if Bitcoin weren't usable, if Bitcoin weren't a usable tender, right? Because a lot of sites won't take it, right? So if it's not a usable tender, then nobody desires it.
Well, that's if nobody expects to be able to exchange it for something in the future, then by definition, it wouldn't be money to them.
Well, right. But what I'm saying is the amount of people who are, so for example, the government comes in, Bitcoin gets too big. The government comes in and says, you can't use Bitcoin through PayPal, or PayPal can't do that, or whatever that, you know, you can't use it to purchase X, Y, and Z. You can't use it on Amazon. All of a sudden, the value of Bitcoin gets chopped in half, right?
Well, maybe.
Because there's no intrinsic value to the Bitcoin. It's only
nothing.
The only value is the demand.
Nothing has intrinsic value. The value only exists as an expression of subjective preference. It exists in your mind when you expect to be able to get utility out of something. So the government might
but everybody has agreed that gold is desirable. And everybody's agreed that.
No, but it has objective traits. It has like it's divisible. It's I don't know. There's 4 different things. It doesn't deteriorate over time.
Right. But people accept it as. But the reason why people accept gold for value is because they expect that they will still be able to have purchasing power from it in the future based on the past.
My point. That's my point.
That's the regression theorem, and the regression theorem could just as easily apply to Bitcoin.
Right, but with gold, you have several thousand years of history to be dependent on.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. That point's not lost on me either. If you're gonna get like you're right. If you're gonna get adoption off something new like Bitcoin or any other competing crypto coin. It is going to be a process, right? It's not going to be something like gold. In all reality, say the government's role in the economy collapsed tomorrow and it stopped having its monopoly on the circulation of credit. Most likely you would have silver-backed currencies, you'd have gold-backed currencies, you'd see Bitcoin, you'd see a competition of all these different monies, and whatever one was best served the purposes of the people who used it would be the one that reigned out over all the other ones. I'm not prescient enough to know which one would win, but I'd certainly like to have the opportunity to find out.
So a couple of years ago, I think it was just before the election, Texas started recalling all their gold back to the state because they were talking about potentially setting up their own state currency. And I think that could be interesting. But again, I think these currencies will just not only have much more intrinsic value, but much more potential of being successful if they do have something inherent to them that's backing them up, like a gold or a silver or whatever. So, for example, some guy in Wisconsin decides I'm going to create Jimmy Bucks or whatever, and I happen to be sitting here on $100 million worth of actual physical gold, and I'm going to sell those sell gold currency markers or receipts or whatever. I'm going to sell currency, and I'm going to have my own currency, and we're going to use it in this town, and whoever else wants to take it is great. That guy, I think, is going to have a lot more success and probably credibility than somebody saying, "Oh, I'm going to do Bitcoin 2.0 or 3.0 or 8.0."
Maybe if the government,
because he's actually got the gold, because he's got $100 million.
Maybe maybe if we assume that the government's no longer around, it could be the case that he beats out on that. But a lot of people don't take delivery in physical gold, and if the government is still around, it might be the case that the government kicks down the doors of his warehouse and takes all his gold for trying to start a competing currency. So that's a vulnerability.
Guys, with all this talk of gold, I just have this urge to rub my hands a little.
Oy vey! Can we get some shekels on those super chats there, boys?
But we've been going for a while. I think we'll have to do another one of these hodgepodge episodes because that's kind of fun. Just to invite somebody on and talk.
I appreciate the invite, man. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I'm always freaking out at you. At least once a discussion there, valid thought. But I do.
If you don't, it's not engaging. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and it's. I think the audience likes it, and I enjoy these discussions. So I definitely appreciate you coming back and hashing it out with me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you got to the point a little bit earlier where you said there's not a huge window between me and a lot of the people on the alt-right. But I do think that window exists, and I think that window is important. And, while I would agree with, 90% of what's said on a lot of these podcasts and the people I follow and whatnot, there is still an aspect of Americanism and being American as opposed to being white American, Black American, Hispanic American, Jewish American, whatever, that I think has value and I think has created something special. So I think that I appreciate you guys allowing on a voice that says something a little bit contradictory. I mean, I'm not a feminist or anything sitting here on the 100%.
It would be boring if we agreed about. It would be boring if we agreed about everything. I don't necessarily agree with you.
If I lived in Obama town, an Obama bomb town, my views would probably feel different.
Yeah.
But, we got Mexicans instead of Somalis, and Vegas is a lot bigger, so it's not as prevalent. But I understand your plight because I've been to Lewiston. So
well, I appreciate you being understanding of that. I'm not trying to jump down your throat. I just. You know how it is, man. Not everybody deals with the third world every single day like I do. So
yeah, I mean that's really rough stuff. I mean, I really don't understand that whole straight up bringing over Africans. Like, why? And by the tens of thousands, it's not like we're picking the 5 geniuses. You know what I mean?
We're not getting the Steve Jobs.
They're not sending their best people, is what we're saying. They're not sending their best people.
No.
So why would anybody? If the United States,
the scary thing is that they might be sending their best people.
Oh God!
But think about it. If there were people who were trying to leave the United States and go to Denmark or whatever, who do you think those people would be? You think they'd be the smartest, richest, most powerful people? No, it'd be people at the bottom who couldn't make it.
leaving the United States for Denmark?
Well, sure. If just like they leave, Uganda for the United States.
I don't know. I feel
Let's
like
say
moving out of the United States seems to me like a sign of affluence, isn't it? Don't you have to be kind of rich to afford that?
Right. Yeah. But that's not that. But right. No. But not if Denmark was coming over and saying we're going to pay for your airfare and give you a house.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's because that's not what we see in Africa. It's like, who wants to leave their country? Well, clearly people who aren't doing well.
Yeah. So if you're gonna get a house in Denmark and the ability to rape all the women you want without any
exactly right. Who wouldn't go?
Why wouldn't you go? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, exactly the worst people. Well, I lived in Mexico for 2 years in Cabo San Lucas, and beautiful place, by the way. And all the Mexicans I knew there said, "Oh, you guys shouldn't allow any of those illegals in." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, they broke the law here. What do you think they're running away?"
Yeah.
That's it's like it's just like half the Americans are down there. Why are they there? Tax evasion, some drug crime. Those are not the best people, clearly.
And then you got a dozen countries. You got a dozen countries or so that won't even take deportees back, right? So it's
well, then they can sit in the airport like Tom Hanks did in Terminal until they run out of money and become a skeleton.
There you go.
Fine by me. Just because they won't take you doesn't mean I have to. No, not interested. Anyway.
All right. Yeah, I got to go get a video out. So I'm going to run. But thanks you guys.
Matt. Thanks for having us,
Thanks
Matt.
again.
As usual, happy Easter, everybody.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, guys.
Bye, guys.
Later.